The first magic ever cast in the wizarding world, when magic had no name. Long before spells were written down, long before wands were carved or words were shaped into incantations, the world already listened. In those earliest ages, the land itself was quieter than we remember it now. Forests stretched without borders, rivers chose their own paths, and humans, small, fragile, and unknowing, walked among forces they could not yet understand. Magic did not arrive as a flash of light or a spoken charm. It arrived as a response. The wizarding world would later call this time pre-structured magic, though no one living then would have known such a term. Magic was not something you used, it was something that answered. When early magical humans felt strong emotion, fear, grief, wonder, desperate love, the world sometimes shifted in subtle ways. A flame burned longer than it should, a wound closed too quickly, a voice carried farther than breath alone could allow. This was not accidental. Magic, at its most ancient level, is reactive rather than controlled. It exists as a latent force woven into reality itself, responding to intention before it responds to technique. This is why children in the modern wizarding world still produce accidental magic. They are briefly touching that same old system, one that predates education, discipline, and law. The first magic ever cast was not a spell. It was a moment of survival. Imagine a small human settlement, somewhere between forest and stone, long before the rise of kingdoms or even named tribes. The night is colder than expected. Predators circle just beyond the firelight, and one human, untrained, unknowing, feels a fear so sharp it borders on prayer. That fear does not form words, it forms intent, and the fire grows. Not because the human commanded it, but because magic, still wild and unstructured, recognized the need. This is the first system we must understand about early wizarding magic. Magic was environmental and emotional, not verbal. There were no spells to memorize, no wand movements to perfect, only alignment between a person's inner state and the world around them. Over time, certain humans noticed patterns. They noticed that some people caused these changes more often than others, that strong emotions produced stronger effects, that calm intention could shape outcomes more gently than panic. This is how the earliest magical lineages began, not through blood purity or titles, but through repetition and awareness. The wizarding world would later divide magic into charms, transfigurations, and curses, but at this stage there was only one distinction that mattered: those who could feel the world listening and those who could not. It is important to understand that these early magic users did not see themselves as special. They believed the world itself was alive and that they were merely speaking to it without words. This belief shaped the way magic developed. Because magic had no language yet, it borrowed one from nature. Early magic followed natural laws rather than replacing them. Heat intensified rather than appearing from nothing. Water moved rather than materialized. Healing accelerated natural processes instead of undoing injury entirely. This is why the oldest forms of magic were slow, patient, and deeply tied to the environment. The world had not yet learned to bend, it only learned to lean. As generations passed, humans began to experiment, not recklessly, but curiously. They learned that repeating certain sounds while focusing intention produced more reliable results. These sounds were not spells yet, they were anchors, ways to hold a thought steady long enough for magic to respond. This marks the quiet beginning of spoken magic. Words did not create magic, they organized it. And with organization came both power and danger. For the first time, magic could be performed without overwhelming emotion. A calm mind could shape the world just as surely as a terrified one.
This allowed magic to be practiced, refined, and eventually taught. But it also meant magic could be separated from empathy. This is where the wizarding world's oldest tension was born: magic as harmony and magic as domination. The first true act of intentional magic, the moment we can call casting rather than reacting, likely occurred when a human deliberately repeated a sound, focused their intent, and watched the world change on purpose. No witnesses recorded it, no name survives, but the world remembered. And magic, once shaped, never forgets being shaped. The age of shaped will. Once magic had learned to listen to intention, it began to learn something else as well. It began to wait. In the generations that followed the first deliberate shaping of magic, those rare humans who could feel the world respond to them started to notice a subtle change.
The wizarding world would later formalize this distinction through laws and ethics, but in this age, consequences came without warning. Those who sought to take from magic rather than align with it began to force outcomes. They pushed intent beyond balance. They repeated incantations with pressure instead of patience. They demanded results rather than inviting them. And magic responded, but not in the way they expected. This marks the birth of coercive magic, the ancestor of what modern witches and wizards would eventually classify as dark magic, not because it was inherently evil, but because it rejected reciprocity. In this system, magic was no longer guided through harmony with the world. It was compressed, held tightly until it burst outward in unnatural ways. The earliest signs were subtle. Spells that succeeded but left the caster exhausted. Healing that closed wounds yet weakened the body days later. Protective enchantments that hardened into barriers impossible to lower. These effects taught an important truth about how magic actually works. Magic remembers the method by which it is shaped. When forced, it leaves residue. That residue settles into the environment and into the caster themselves. Places where coercive magic was practiced frequently began to feel wrong. Animals avoided them. Plants grew twisted. Silence lingered too long. This was not corruption in the moral sense, it was imbalance. Magic, when denied release and reciprocity, distorts both space and intention. Some early practitioners noticed this and pulled back. Others saw only the results, stronger effects, faster outcomes, and continued. Thus, the first philosophical divide of the wizarding world emerged. On one side were those who believed magic was a relationship to be nurtured and respected. On the other were those who believed magic was a force to be mastered and bent. No names marked this divide yet, no factions declared themselves, but the separation had begun. It was during this era that tools first appeared. The body alone, once sufficient, now struggled to contain the strain of coercive magic. Practitioners sought external conduits, objects that could hold focus and absorb excess force. Wood was the first choice, not for symbolism but for function. Living trees already conducted natural energy. Carved branches helped channel intent outward without tearing the caster apart. This is the quiet origin of the wand. Early wands were crude, unbalanced, and deeply personal. They were not standardized. Each was shaped to match the caster's mental rhythm and emotional stability. Here we learn another foundational system of the wizarding world. Tools do not create power, they regulate it. A wand does not make magic stronger, it makes it safer, by giving intent a narrow path rather than letting it spill unpredictably. Those who continued without such tools often suffered. Burned nerves, memory loss, unintended transformations that could not be reversed. These were not punishments, they were feedback. Magic has always taught through consequence. As wand use slowly spread, spoken incantations grew more precise.
Gestures became smaller, more refined. Magic was learning to fit itself into human limits, but something was lost in the process. The old responsiveness, the sense that the world itself was listening, began to fade for some practitioners. Magic became quieter, more distant, filtered through wood, word, and will. This loss would echo for millennia, and yet, without this shift, the wizarding world could not have survived. Power without structure eventually destroys both user and land. The first true magical traditions now stood at a crossroads: preserve harmony and accept limitation, or pursue dominance and accept the cost. The first keepers of balance. Not all who felt magic slipping away were willing to accept the loss. As tools multiplied and incantations hardened into routine, some practitioners sensed that something essential was being buried beneath structure. They felt it in the way the air no longer answered as readily, in how the land grew quieter around practiced spell work, as if magic itself had learned caution. These were not the most powerful magic users of their age. They were often slower, gentler, less impressive to watch, but they were attentive in a way others were not. They listened. These individuals began to gather, not to teach power, but to remember origin. They met in places where magic still flowed freely. Deep forests untouched by coercive spellwork, caves where stone hummed softly when approached, clearings where emotions seemed to carry farther than sound. This gathering did not form a council or an order. There were no ranks, no titles, no symbols. They came simply to observe how magic behaved when it was not commanded. Here, a crucial system of the wizarding world took its earliest shape: magical resonance. Magic no longer surged only in moments of fear or wonder. It lingered, almost patiently, as if expecting to be invited again. This was the birth of what the wizarding world would later call magical readiness. The idea that magic, once awakened in a place or a person, becomes easier to reach again. Land remembered, people remembered, and magic itself remembered being used. Early magical communities did not yet separate themselves from non-magical humans. There were no secret villages, no hidden schools, no laws of concealment. Magic lived openly, though quietly, woven into daily survival rather than spectacle. A healer learned that placing their hands a certain way eased pain faster. A hunter discovered that whispering the same breath pattern before releasing an arrow made the shot truer. A mother found that humming a specific tone while holding her child could calm even the deepest night terrors. None of these were spells in the modern sense. They were rituals of alignment, ways of placing the mind, body, and breath into harmony with magic's natural flow. Here we encountered the second great system of early wizarding magic. Magic moved through the body before it ever moved through tools. The human nervous system acted as a conduit. Breath regulated focus. Posture influenced outcome. Emotion provided the initial energy, but discipline determined the shape. This is why later wand movements resemble gestures of intent rather than random motions. They are echoes of these early bodily practices, frozen into tradition long after their origins were forgotten. As magical knowledge spread, slowly, unevenly, differences began to emerge. Some individuals could shape magic with remarkable ease, while others struggled despite equal belief and effort. This was not simply talent. Magic responds strongly to cognitive consistency. A focused mind produces cleaner results than a scattered one. Those who could maintain a single intention without doubt or contradiction found magic easier to guide. This principle still governs spellcasting today. A spell fails not because words are mispronounced, but because intent fractures. In these early ages, failure was dangerous.
A poorly shaped intention could cause magic to misinterpret desire. A wish for warmth might draw fire too close. A desire for protection could harden the body instead of shielding it. And so, out of necessity, early magic users began to share knowledge. They gathered, not in schools, but in circles, around fires, under trees that seemed to listen, near stones that felt older than memory. These gatherings formed the earliest magical traditions, passed through story rather than instruction. There were no textbooks, only cautionary tales and gentle corrections. This communal sharing marked the beginning of magical ethics. Because magic had no inherent morality, it reflected the clarity or confusion of the one shaping it. Over time, certain sounds proved more effective than others. Low tones grounded magic. Sharp consonants accelerated it. Extended vowels stabilized it. Language began to intertwine with power. This is where the roots of spell structure emerge. Magic required three things to function reliably: intent, focus, and release. Intent defined the goal. Focus held it steady. Release allowed magic to act without resistance. Early spoken spells often failed because release was misunderstood. Holding on to desire too tightly caused magic to collapse inward. Letting go too early caused it to dissipate. This delicate balance is why modern spellcasting requires confidence without strain. Magic must be guided, then trusted. As centuries passed, these spoken sounds evolved. They grew more formal, more repeatable. Certain phrases became associated with specific outcomes, not because the words themselves were magical, but because generations of intent had shaped magic to recognize them. This is how incantations were born, not as commands, but as agreements between magic and memory. Yet as magic became more predictable, it also became more tempting. Some began to ask not how magic could help them live, but how it could help them rule. And when magic is asked to dominate rather than harmonize, it changes the one who asks. When power learned to take. There comes a moment in every long history when a gift is no longer treated as a shared breath, but as a resource to be claimed. For the early magic users of the world, that moment did not arrive with violence or conquest. It arrived with certainty. As spoken forms grew more reliable, as intention could be shaped without fear or desperation, some practitioners began to believe they finally understood magic completely. This belief was the first true mistake. Magic, even at its most responsive, has never been a thing that belongs to anyone. It flows through reality the way gravity does, present everywhere, owned by no one, but capable of being exploited when misunderstood. Magic behaves differently depending on where it is practiced. Certain places amplify it, others dampen it. This is not coincidence. Magic settles where intention has been consistent over long periods. Just as paths form where many feet walk the same way, magical pathways form where similar intentions repeat. These early keepers noticed that places used for coercive magic grew unstable, while places of balanced use grew calmer and more responsive. Magic was shaping geography, not visibly, but spiritually. They understood something that would later be forgotten and rediscovered many times. Magic does not prefer power. It prefers clarity. Within these gatherings, stories were shared, not of triumph, but of mistakes, not of conquest, but of restraint. One story told of a healer who refused to force a cure, choosing instead to strengthen the body's own recovery. Another spoke of a fire shaper who learned to warm a village without scorching its soil. Through these stories, magic was taught indirectly. This is how early magical education truly began, not through instruction, but through pattern recognition. Learners were not told what to do, they were shown outcomes and invited to notice why they occurred.
This approach revealed a fundamental truth about how magic works. Magic aligns more easily with processes than with results. When intent focused on how something should unfold, magic flowed smoothly. When intent fixated on what must happen, magic resisted or recoiled. This distinction would later underpin the difference between charms and curses, between transfiguration and violation. As these keepers refined their understanding, they began to preserve knowledge intentionally, but writing, still crude and unreliable, felt insufficient. Instead, they encoded memory into ritual form. Movements, sequences, repeating phrases spoken in specific emotional states. Rituals were not spells, they were containers, ways of holding complex magical understanding without reducing it to force. This is the origin of ceremonial magic. Ceremonial magic moves slowly by design. Its purpose is not efficiency, but alignment between people, place, and moment. Modern wizarding society often dismisses rituals as outdated, yet many of the most stable and enduring enchantments still rely on their principles. During this era, the first true magical boundaries appeared, not barriers of stone or ward, but agreements. Certain places were left untouched. Certain forms of magic were practiced only under supervision. Certain knowledge was shared sparingly. This was not secrecy born of fear, it was restraint born of understanding. But restraint invites opposition. Those who had embraced dominance over magic began to view these gatherings as weakness. Why limit what could be taken? Why slow what could be accelerated? The tension between these philosophies grew quietly, unmarked by open conflict, but heavy with inevitability. And somewhere within this growing divide, magic itself began to change again, preparing for a world that would soon demand rules, separation, and the hiding of wonders. When magic learned to withdraw, the change did not announce itself. There was no moment when the sky darkened or when the land cried out in warning. Magic has never worked that way. Instead, it receded. Those who practiced coercive magic began to notice something unsettling. Spells that once surged with immediate force now required greater effort. Incantations had to be repeated. Tools needed refinement. They believed this meant magic was weakening. The keepers of balance knew better. Magic was not growing weaker, it was growing selective. This is one of the most important truths in the history of the wizarding world. Magic possesses a form of adaptive resistance. When repeatedly shaped through harmful or destabilizing methods, it alters its responsiveness, not to punish, but to preserve the integrity of reality itself. Magic does not judge, but it does protect the structures it flows through. In regions where dominance became common, magic began to slip out of reach unless aggressively pursued. Spontaneous manifestations ceased. The land grew dull, inert, resistant. In contrast, places tended by restraint grew richer. Simple intentions carried farther. Rituals deepened in effect. Magic flowed with less effort, not more. This divergence marked the beginning of magical ecology, the understanding that magic behaves like a living system, affected by use, overuse, and neglect. The keepers recorded this not in books, but in careful choice. They moved away from places scarred by forced magic. They settled near sites where magic still answered softly. Over generations, these places became anchors, what modern witches and wizards would later call naturally attuned locations. Forests where charms lingered, springs where healing worked faster, hills where divination felt clearer. Magic had begun to choose where it wished to remain.
At the same time, something else emerged. Children. Not trained practitioners, not seekers of power, but children born into a world already shaped by magic's withdrawal. These children displayed accidental magic more intensely than before. Objects moved without warning, glass shattered, animals reacted as if sensing something older than fear. This was not coincidence. As magic withdrew from those who forced it, It concentrated in those who did not yet know how to shape it at all. This reveals another fundamental system of the wizarding world. Magical potential accumulates where intent is unformed. Children, lacking rigid expectation, allow magic to surface freely. They do not command, they react. In many ways, they resembled the earliest magic users, before words, before tools, before certainty. The keepers recognized this pattern immediately. They began to observe, quietly, protectively. They did not train children early. They did not correct accidental magic unless it caused harm. They allowed magic to express itself naturally first. From this practice came a belief that would later define wizarding education. Magic must be felt before it is disciplined. Those who trained too early produced rigid casters, technically precise, emotionally disconnected. Those allowed to develop naturally retained sensitivity, adaptability, and a deeper awareness of consequence. Meanwhile, coercive practitioners reacted with frustration. They increased pressure, refined tools, standardized incantations. In doing so, they unknowingly accelerated magic's retreat. Magic responds poorly to desperation. The more it was forced, the less it offered. This created the illusion of scarcity, and scarcity breeds conflict. As magical resources seemed to dwindle, competition replaced curiosity. Knowledge was hoarded, techniques were guarded. This is the first moment when magic truly became dangerous, not because of what it could do, but because of how people fought over it. The keepers watching this unfold understood that open practice could no longer continue, not without risking devastation. And so they made a quiet decision, one that would echo into every hidden alley, concealed school, and unspoken law of the wizarding world. Magic would not disappear, but it would step back, and those who wished to follow it would need to learn how to listen again. The quiet birth of secrecy. Secrecy did not begin as a rule. It began as a kindness. The keepers of balance did not fear the wider world. They feared what magic could become when handled without patience or care. They had seen how easily wonder turned into hunger, how quickly curiosity hardened into entitlement. And they understood something essential. Magic cannot survive long in a world that demands constant proof of its power. So they began to step aside, not vanish, but withdraw gently, the way one lowers their voice when a room grows too loud. They moved their gatherings farther from common paths. They chose valleys hidden by mist, forests that seemed to rearrange themselves, coastlines where the tide erased footprints before dawn. These places were not enchanted at first. They became enchanted through consistent intention. This reveals another system that governs the wizarding world. Concealment magic is accumulative, not instantaneous. No single spell makes a place hidden forever. Instead, repeated acts of subtle redirection, misremembered turns, overlooked clearings, paths that feel unimportant, teach the world how to look away. Magic learned this lesson from humans. Rather than forcing invisibility, the keepers encouraged unimportance. If a place did not demand attention, magic did not need to defend it. Over generations, these hidden locations became stable refuges, not sealed off from the world, but softly misaligned with it. Travelers passed nearby without noticing. Sounds carried oddly. Time felt slightly different. These were the first magically secluded communities, ancestors to wizarding villages, enclaves, and schools yet to be named. During this era, the keepers also began to shape a new kind of knowledge. They understood that memory alone was fragile. Stories could be altered, warnings could fade. So they created magical memory anchors, simple objects, stones, rings, woven cords, imbued not with power, but with context. These objects did not cast spells. They reminded their holders how magic was meant to be approached,
When touched, they stirred calm. When misused, they grew heavy or inert. This is the forgotten ancestor of many modern magical artifacts. Objects were not designed to perform magic for the user, but to shape the user's relationship to magic. At the same time, children with emerging magical potential were quietly guided, not gathered, not claimed, but observed from a distance. Families were encouraged to move toward attuned lands. Accidental magic was softened rather than suppressed.
Fear was replaced with familiarity. From this practice emerged a crucial educational principle. Magic thrives in environments where it is neither worshipped nor feared. It must be lived with. Meanwhile, those outside these circles began to notice absence. Magic seemed rarer, stranger. Stories of wonders felt old, half-remembered. This was not illusion. Magic was no longer willing to answer loudly. Those who pursued dominance found themselves chasing echoes. Their spells worked, but left scars on themselves, on the land, on memory itself. In contrast, those who accepted restraint found magic increasingly responsive as though relieved to be handled gently again. This divergence would eventually make secrecy unavoidable, not because magic wished to hide, but because only a quieter world could still hear it clearly. The keepers understood that one day formal structures would be needed, rules, boundaries, education. But for now, secrecy remained organic, a habit rather than a law. Magic did not vanish from the world, it simply chose where it would still speak. The first unspoken laws. There is a point at which habit becomes tradition, and tradition, if left unexamined, becomes law. For the early keepers of magic, this transformation happened slowly, so slowly that many never realized it was occurring at all. They had not set out to govern magic, they had only wished to protect it. Yet as generations passed within hidden valleys and quiet forests, patterns solidified. Certain practices were always followed, certain boundaries were never crossed, certain knowledge was shared only when readiness was clear. These patterns formed the first unspoken laws of magic. No voice declared them, no council voted them into existence. They emerged through consequence. A young practitioner who revealed magic carelessly found their abilities growing unstable. Another who used magic to dominate others felt it slip from their grasp over time. Those who practiced with patience and humility found magic deepening rather than expanding. Magic itself enforced these laws by responding differently to different approaches. This is a central system of the wizarding world that endures even now. Magical law existed before magical government. Rules were not written to control magic, they were written later to describe patterns magic had already established. During this era, secrecy sharpened. It was no longer enough to live quietly. Some truths, the keepers realized, could not safely exist in the wider world at all. Spoken incantations became standardized not for efficiency, but for containment. A standardized spell limits interpretation. It narrows what magic is allowed to do. This is why modern spells feel rigid compared to ancient magic. They are designed to be predictable, to prevent unintended consequences when taught at scale. Alongside this came the earliest division of magical knowledge. Some practices were taught freely: healing alignment, protective charms, environmental attunement. Others were restricted, not banned, but wrapped in caution and ritual. This was the quiet birth of forbidden magic, not because it was evil, but because it required a depth of self-knowledge most had not yet achieved. Power without self-understanding had already proven dangerous. One of the most important developments of this age was the recognition of magical thresholds. Magic does not grow evenly. It advances in stages, plateaus followed by sudden expansions of ability. Pushing someone beyond a threshold too early could fracture their connection to magic permanently.
This is why early teachers avoided direct instruction. They waited for signs, consistent accidental magic, emotional regulation, a natural sense of consequence. These observations would one day become entrance criteria, age limits, and educational frameworks, but for now, they remained intuitive. As secrecy solidified, the wider non-magical world continued forward, building settlements, forming myths, forgetting wonders. Magic did not oppose this forgetting, it adapted to it. In many ways, the division between magical and non-magical society was not enforced from one side, it was mutually convenient. Non-magical humans grew wary of what they could not explain. Magical communities grew cautious of what could not be controlled. Between them formed a veil, not of illusion, but of misunderstanding, and magic settled comfortably behind it. Yet one question remained unresolved, quietly pressing against every hidden community and unspoken rule. How long could magic remain safe without being named, taught, and protected by something stronger than memory? The answer would come, not through philosophy, but through necessity, and with it, the first true step toward a structured wizarding world. When guardians became necessary. For a long time, memory was enough. Stories passed by firelight, rituals repeated with care, children guided gently toward understanding rather than command.
But time has a way of testing even the quietest systems. As hidden communities grew larger and more stable, as generations were born who had never seen magic mishandled openly, a subtle shift occurred. Caution softened, not into arrogance, but into comfort. And comfort, while gentle, can dull attention. Magic, once protected by scarcity and fear, was now surrounded by familiarity. Young practitioners learned structured spells early. Tools became more refined, more reliable. Mistakes were rarer, and therefore more shocking when they happened. It was one such mistake that changed everything. The details were never recorded precisely, and perhaps that is intentional, but the pattern survives across many traditions. A gifted young magic user, confident, capable, deeply talented, attempted to shape a complex working alone, not out of malice, not even ambition, out of certainty. The magic answered, too fully. The result was not destruction, but distortion, a place where time moved unevenly, where emotions echoed long after people left, where spells behaved unpredictably as if remembering something unfinished. This incident revealed a truth the keepers could no longer ignore. Magic scales faster than wisdom. Ability can grow in isolation. Judgment cannot. For the first time, the keepers understood that restraint and secrecy alone were insufficient. Magic required stewardship, not rulers, not enforcers, but guardians, those whose role was to watch patterns, intervene gently, and preserve balance across communities rather than within them alone. Thus began the earliest form of magical oversight, not centralized, not formal, but intentional. Travelers traveled between hidden settlements. They shared warnings, observed practices, helped correct imbalance before it deepened. These travelers did not impose rules. They asked questions. Why was this spell taught so early? Why was this place used so frequently? Why was this knowledge shared without preparation? Their presence reshaped magical culture. Communities began to reflect on their own habits, to recognize blind spots, to remember why secrecy had begun in the first place. This is the origin of a critical wizarding system. Magical responsibility extends beyond the individual. Magic does not exist in isolation. Every working alters the environment, the collective memory, and the future behavior of magic itself. From this understanding emerged the earliest agreements between communities. Certain practices would require guidance. Certain places would be protected from experimentation. Certain forms of magic would be delayed until maturity, not of age, but of understanding. These agreements were never written. They were spoken once, remembered carefully, and rarely challenged. And yet, even guardians need structure. As travel increased, as knowledge grew more complex, memory once again strained under its own weight. The keepers began to realize that magic's survival would soon depend on something they had long resisted: formal preservation. Not domination, not rigid law, but shared record. Symbols were developed, simple, layered marks that carried meaning without revealing technique. Places were marked, not on maps, but in story and song. This was the quiet dawn of magical documentation. The world was not yet ready for schools or ministries, but it was ready for something gentler: continuity. The first words that remembered magic. Writing magic down felt like betrayal. For generations, the keepers had trusted memory, believing that living minds were safer vessels than silent marks. Words on stone or skin could not sense readiness. They could not hesitate. They could not refuse. And yet, memory was fading, not because it was weak, but because the world was growing more complex. More people were born with magical potential. More techniques existed than any single teacher could hold. More places carried lingering enchantments whose origins were already forgotten. Magic was no longer small enough to be carried only in stories. So the keepers compromised. They did not record spells, they recorded principles. This distinction matters deeply. The first magical writings did not say how to perform magic. They described how magic behaves. They spoke of balance rather than outcome, of intention rather than result, of consequence rather than power. A mark carved into stone might describe how magic resists haste. A woven pattern might remind the reader that repetition strengthens pathways. A symbol painted in ash might convey that magic bends more easily when released than when held. These were not instructions, they were mirrors. Anyone who read them had to already understand something in order to recognize their meaning. This is the origin of magical literacy. Magic has always distinguished between those who read symbols and those who comprehend them. As these early records spread, they changed how magic was taught. Instead of learning through imitation alone, apprentices were encouraged to reflect, to compare experiences, to notice patterns across different workings. Magic education became less about copying and more about interpretation. This system survives even now. A spellbook does not teach magic by itself. It responds differently to different minds. Those who approach it with curiosity learn more than those who seek shortcuts. At the same time, writing introduced a new danger. Knowledge could travel faster than wisdom. A symbol copied without context lost its restraint. A principle misunderstood could be misapplied. To counter this, the keepers introduced layered knowledge. Some writings were openly visible, others required proximity to attuned places. Some revealed meaning only after repeated exposure. Magic was learning to protect its own understanding. This is the forgotten ancestor of enchanted texts, of books that refuse to open, of pages that remain blank until the reader is ready. These defenses were not added later, they were present from the very first magical records. Because magic, even when written, has never trusted certainty. As education slowly stabilized, children were no longer guided solely by family or instinct. They were brought together, carefully, temporarily, to learn not spells, but shared language. How to speak about magic without commanding it, how to ask questions without demanding answers, how to recognize when not to act. These gatherings were brief, seasonal,
always returning learners to their communities, but they planted something new, a sense of shared identity. For the first time, magic users began to see themselves not just as individuals gifted by circumstance, but as part of a wider, hidden continuity. This identity did not replace the world outside, it existed alongside it, quietly. And yet, the more magic was understood, the clearer one truth became. Magic could no longer survive as scattered wisdom alone. Too much depended on shared restraint. Too many lives were shaped by unseen choices. The question was no longer whether magic should be taught, but how it could be taught without becoming ordinary, exploitable, or dangerous. The answer would not arrive all at once. It would take centuries, but its first form was already stirring, in temporary gatherings, in guarded texts, in the idea that magic had a history worth protecting, where learning began to stay. The earliest gatherings had always been temporary, a season, a turning of the year, a moment of shared reflection before everyone returned to their own lands, their own rhythms, their own ways of listening. But as magical knowledge deepened, these brief meetings began to feel insufficient. Certain questions required time, certain mistakes required guidance that could not be rushed, and certain forms of magic, especially those involving transformation or memory, could not be approached safely without continuity. So, without declaring it, learning began to linger. A clearing used year after year no longer forgot the footsteps of those who returned. A stone circle remembered the shape of repeated intention. A house built to host travelers slowly adapted to the presence of magic itself. These places were not founded, they emerged. This is the true origin of magical schools, not institutions imposed upon magic, but places where learning simply refused to leave. At first, nothing was formal. There were no schedules, no age divisions, no standardized progression. Learning followed readiness. Some stayed for weeks, others for years. A few never left at all, finding that their sense of balance grew stronger within those attuned walls. This introduced another enduring system of the wizarding world, place-based magic amplification. When learning occurs repeatedly in the same location, magic adapts to support it. Spells stabilize, errors soften, insight arrives more easily. This is why certain locations feel inherently suited to study, even centuries later. They are not powerful because of what was built there, they are powerful because of what was practiced with care. As these places grew more defined, so did the need for gentle structure, not rules, but rhythm, times for rest, times for practice, times for silence. Magic responds poorly to exhaustion. Overworked minds fracture intention, so learning spaces began to mirror the balance magic itself preferred. This rhythm would later evolve into timetables, terms, and educational cycles, but in this age it remained organic. The role of the teacher also changed. No longer just a guide or storyteller, teachers became anchors, stable points of reference within a fluid learning environment. They were chosen not for power, but for consistency, for their ability to recognize when not to intervene, for their willingness to let students struggle safely. This is a vital distinction in wizarding pedagogy. Intervention too early weakens magical intuition. Intervention too late risks harm.
True teaching lives in between. As more learners gathered in these emerging centers, differences in magical expression became clearer. Some excelled in shaping matter, others in influencing perception. Some felt magic most strongly through emotion, others through logic or pattern. Rather than forcing uniformity, these early learning places encouraged divergence. This is why the wizarding world never developed a single magical discipline, but many overlapping ones. Magic does not wish to be simplified. As learning settled into place, so did responsibility. Communities near these centers accepted a new role, protecting the space, maintaining its quiet, absorbing the subtle effects of concentrated magic. This was not always easy. Attuned places attract attention even when hidden, And so concealment evolved again, from habit to practice to design. By the end of this era, magic was no longer wandering. It had homes, not fortresses, not palaces, homes of patience where knowledge could grow slowly without being consumed by haste. The shape of a school yet unnamed. Among the many places where learning chose to stay, one stood apart, not in power, but in balance. It was not the largest gathering, nor the oldest, but it endured where others shifted, holding its purpose gently, even as the world around it changed. This place lay where different currents met, old forests giving way to open land, stone rising naturally from soil, water never far, yet never dominant. Magic there did not surge, it settled. Those who arrived felt it immediately. Spells required less effort, but more thought. Mistakes revealed themselves clearly, without punishment or spectacle. The keepers who tended this place understood why. Magic functions best where contradictions coexist, stability without rigidity, freedom without chaos, tradition without stagnation. This place embodied that balance. Over time, it attracted a particular kind of learner, those who did not seek mastery but understanding, those willing to remain uncertain longer than most. Here, learning was not accelerated, it was deepened. One of the most important systems refined in this place was progressive magical layering. Rather than teaching spells in isolation, students were introduced to magic in overlapping phases. A charm was not complete until its effect, its cost, and its environmental echo were all understood. Casting was followed by reflection, reflection by repetition, repetition by restraint. Magic was not something to finish, it was something to live alongside. This approach changed how magic behaved. Spells cast here tended to leave fewer traces. Enchantment residue faded more cleanly. The land remained receptive rather than exhausted. Magic, it seemed, approved. The teachers noticed something else as well. Students trained in this environment retained a stronger connection to accidental magic, not uncontrolled but responsive. They could adapt when spells failed. They sensed imbalance before it grew dangerous. They listened before acting. These traits would later become hallmarks of the wizarding world's most respected practitioners. As this place's reputation spread quietly, other learning centers began to mirror its methods, not copying structure, but adopting philosophy. The idea of a school shifted. No longer merely a place to acquire ability, it became a place to cultivate judgment. This shift mattered deeply because the world outside was changing. Non-magical societies were growing louder, more structured, more demanding of explanation. Wonder was becoming something to conquer or dismiss, not to live with. Magic sensed this too. Its responses grew subtler, its expressions more inward. Those trained without sensitivity struggled. Those trained with sensitivity adapted. In this environment, the unnamed school's influence expanded, not through proclamation, but through graduates. They returned to their communities carrying habits rather than rules, asking questions instead of asserting answers, teaching others how to notice magic, not how to dominate it. Slowly, almost invisibly, a shared culture formed. Not uniform, not centralized, but coherent. This coherence made one thing inevitable. If magic was to remain hidden yet alive, it would need a common reference point, a place whose methods could anchor the rest, whose memory could outlast individuals. The unnamed school was becoming that anchor. But with influence comes attention, and attention, even quiet attention, carries risk. The weight of a name. For a long time, the school remained what it had always been, a place known by feeling rather than by title. Those who arrived rarely asked its name. Those who left rarely spoke of it directly.
It was referred to in half-phrases, in gestures, in the way people said there and meant something more than location. But as its influence widened, silence became fragile. Graduates carried its habits into distant communities.
Their spell work bore the same quiet restraint. Their teaching echoed the same patience. Over time, patterns were noticed. Other magical centers began to ask questions. Where did these methods come from? Who taught them? How could such consistency exist without coordination? The keepers understood the danger immediately. Magic had survived by being unremarkable, by slipping past attention rather than confronting it. But now, coherence itself was becoming visible. This forced a decision they had delayed for generations. Either the school remained unnamed and risked fragmentation, its philosophy diluted, misunderstood, reshaped by rumor, or it accepted a single, careful symbol through which its values could be preserved. They chose the symbol, not because magic needed identity, but because memory does. A name, in the magical sense, is not a label. It is a binding reference, a way for intention to return to the same place across time, distance, and change. Names allow magic to recognize continuity. The keepers were careful. They did not choose a name that suggested dominance, nor one that implied ownership of magic itself. They chose something that reflected shelter, learning, and transition, a place where wild potential became considered understanding, where power was softened into wisdom. The name, once spoken consistently, changed the school in subtle ways. Spells cast within its bounds grew more stable. Protective enchantments layered naturally. Memory clung to stone and timber more readily. This reveals a quiet but crucial system of the wizarding world. Named places hold magic more reliably than unnamed ones. Magic does not require names to exist, but it uses them to orient itself, much like a traveler uses stars. The name did not announce itself to the world. It did not spread beyond those who needed it, but within magical communities, it became a point of reference, not an authority, a reminder. As the school's identity settled, so did its responsibility. It could no longer remain purely reactive. Students would arrive seeking guidance, not discovery alone. Communities would look to it during imbalance or uncertainty. The keepers responded by formalizing nothing unnecessary. They resisted hierarchy. They avoided spectacle. They preserved flexibility wherever possible. But they accepted one essential truth. When magic is taught across generations, someone must remember why it was taught that way. So memory was embedded, not just in texts or teachers, but in structure. Spaces were designed to encourage reflection. Paths curved rather than cutting straight lines. Rooms held silence easily. Even architecture became pedagogy. Magic learns from environment as much as from intent. As centuries passed, the named school did not claim centrality. Others rose and fell. Methods diverged and rejoined. But when crisis came, when misuse threatened exposure or collapse, people returned to that name, seeking not solutions, but orientation. And magic answered more clearly there than anywhere else. The world beyond continued to change. Non-magical societies grew louder, faster, less patient. Explanations replaced wonder. The separation between worlds deepened. And in that widening space, the need for concealment, coordination, and collective responsibility became unavoidable. When secrecy became a choice. There is a profound difference between something that is hidden by habit and something that is hidden by decision. For centuries, magic had lived quietly beside the non-magical world, withdrawing when attention grew sharp, returning when curiosity softened. This balance had held not because of enforcement, but because neither side pressed too hard. That balance was ending. Non-magical societies were changing in ways magic could not ignore. Settlements grew into cities. Stories hardened into records. Observation became systematic. The world was learning to measure itself,
Magic does not resist observation out of fear. It resists it because observation seeks certainty, and magic survives through ambiguity. As curiosity turned into scrutiny, small fractures began to appear. A spell misremembered became rumor. A coincidence repeated too often became investigation. A wandering magical creature left tracks that did not fade quickly enough. None of these moments were catastrophic alone. Together, they formed pressure. The keepers, now spread across many communities, recognized the pattern with quiet urgency. If magic remained merely hidden, it would eventually be found. And once found by those who sought to explain or control it, it would not survive unchanged. So secrecy could no longer remain passive. It had to become intentional. This was the moment when concealment evolved from environmental habit into deliberate magical practice. The first true concealment workings were not invisibility spells. They were misdirection enchantments.
Rather than erasing magic, they softened perception around it. Paths curved subtly away from magical sites. Memories blurred at their edges. Attention slid elsewhere without force. This form of concealment respected free will. It did not compel ignorance. It encouraged disinterest. This distinction mattered. Magic reacts poorly to domination, even when domination is meant to protect it. Here we encounter a vital system of advanced wizarding magic, perceptual anchoring. Human perception relies on expectation. When expectation is gently altered, reality rearranges itself quietly. Early concealment spells worked by anchoring perception to what should be present rather than what was. A hidden village was not invisible. It was simply never quite where anyone expected it to be. At the same time, memory magic grew more refined. Not the erasure of thought, which is violent and unstable, but contextual fading. Events involving magic were remembered, but stripped of certainty. Details softened, explanations dissolved. This is why non-magical histories still contain echoes of magic, miracles, myths, unexplained wonders, without ever converging into proof. The keepers were careful. These enchantments were not cast broadly. They were layered gradually, tested gently, adjusted over generations. Magic learns through repetition, so secrecy was taught slowly. But even gentle concealment has consequences. Magical communities began to feel more separate. Children grew up knowing two worlds rather than one shared reality. Language diverged, assumptions shifted. This separation was not cruelty, it was containment, and containment requires boundaries. Thus emerged the earliest discussions of responsibility beyond community. If secrecy was to protect magic everywhere, it could not be optional in some places and ignored in others. Not all agreed. Some believed magic should adapt openly or perish honestly. Others argued that secrecy itself distorted magic's nature. These debates were calm, thoughtful, unresolved. But magic, as always, offered feedback. In places where secrecy was refused, pressure mounted. Exposure grew more likely. Magic responded by becoming unstable or scarce. In places where concealment was embraced with care, magic remained responsive and deep. Reality was choosing a side, even if philosophy had not yet caught up. Gradually, without proclamation, secrecy became expectation, not enforced yet, but assumed. The wizarding world was no longer simply hidden, it was separate. And separation, once accepted, creates the need for coordination. The first promise ever made to magic. Promises, unlike spells, do not rely on precision. They rely on collective intent. And it was collective intent, quiet, careful, and uncelebrated, that finally gave secrecy its binding force. By the time concealment had become expectation, magical communities across distant lands were already living by similar assumptions. They hid their practices, they softened memories, they guided attention away.
But assumptions fracture under pressure. One community's carelessness could undo another's patience. One reckless act could ripple outward, drawing scrutiny where none was wanted. Magic does not suffer these fractures silently. Instability appeared not only in spells, but in relationships between communities. Trust thinned, uncertainty grew. It became clear that secrecy could not remain informal, not because magic demanded control, but because people needed reassurance. So the keepers gathered. Not all of them, not even most, only those whose paths naturally crossed, travelers, teachers, guardians of attuned places. They met in a location chosen not for power, but for neutrality, a place where magic felt balanced, unimpressed, unbiased. There was no ceremony, no declaration, only conversation. They spoke not of laws, but of responsibility. They did not ask, should magic be hidden? That question had already been answered by consequence. They asked, how do we protect what depends on all of us? From this conversation emerged the first true covenant of the wizarding world, not written, not enforced, but promised. Each community would take responsibility not only for its own secrecy, but for the impact of its actions on the whole. Magic would not be used to provoke curiosity. Power would not be displayed for pride. Those who could not yet understand consequence would be guided, not indulged. This covenant did not threaten punishment, it offered continuity, and magic responded. For the first time, concealment workings aligned across regions. Perceptual misdirection became smoother, less effortful. Memory fading grew more consistent. This revealed a profound system at the heart of magic. Magic amplifies coherence. When intent is shared across many minds, magic stabilizes itself. The world becomes easier to maintain, not because of force, but because of agreement.
This was the first time magic was shaped by collective ethics rather than individual choice. It marked a turning point. From this moment onward, magic would no longer respond only to the one who cast it. It would respond to the culture surrounding its use. This is why certain acts of magic feel heavier than others, why some spells carry a sense of violation even when performed correctly. Magic remembers not just action, but context. The covenant did not name itself. It did not need to, but it changed how magic was approached everywhere it reached. Children were taught earlier about restraint. Teachers spoke more openly about consequence. Communities communicated quietly when imbalance appeared. This was not governance, it was alignment. Yet alignment creates momentum, and momentum over time demands structure. As centuries passed, new questions arose. What happens when someone breaks the promise? Who intervenes when guidance fails? How do you respond when magic itself is endangered by those who no longer listen? The covenant had been enough for a simpler world, but the world was no longer simple, and magic, once again, was about to change. When guardians learned to intervene. For a long time, the promise was enough. Most communities honored it instinctively. They understood that secrecy was not a burden, but a shelter for magic and for themselves. But promises, even shared ones, are tested not by those who agree with them, but by those who no longer feel bound. The first fractures did not come from cruelty, they came from certainty. A handful of practitioners, brilliant, disciplined, deeply skilled, began to believe they had transcended the need for restraint. They followed the forms correctly, they understood the risks intellectually, and so they assumed consequence would never reach them. Magic disagreed. Their workings were precise, yet something felt wrong. Effects lingered longer than intended. Perceptual misdirection failed unevenly. Traces accumulated where none should remain. These were not crimes in any formal sense, but they were disturbances, ripples strong enough to travel. Other communities felt them, not as damage, but as tension. For the first time, the keepers faced a question they had long hoped to avoid. What happens when guidance is refused? They answered carefully. Intervention did not begin as punishment, it began as presence. Trusted guardians traveled to sites of imbalance. They observed, they listened, they asked the same quiet questions they always had. But now, when warning went unheeded, they stayed. This marks the birth of a new system within the wizarding world, corrective magic. Corrective magic does not undo spells, it restores conditions. A destabilized place might be gently neutralized, its magical pathways encouraged to disperse. A practitioner overreaching their limits might find their magic growing unresponsive, not stripped away, but temporarily unreachable. This was not retaliation, it was containment. Magic resists being used to dominate others, even when that domination is subtle. Corrective workings aligned with this tendency. They did not impose control, they reinforced boundaries magic already recognized. Over time, communities began to accept intervention as part of collective responsibility, not welcomed but understood. And understanding changed behavior. Teachers became more attentive, advanced practices were delayed longer. Discussions of consequence grew more explicit. Magic responded by stabilizing further. Yet intervention raised another concern. Who decides when guidance becomes correction? Who watches the guardians? The keepers did not answer this with hierarchy. They answered with distribution. No single group held authority everywhere. Guardians rotated. Communities observed one another. Intervention required consensus, not command. This prevented power from concentrating too tightly, but it also slowed response. As the world beyond magic grew more interconnected, trade routes expanding, records improving, travel accelerating, the risk of exposure increased faster than corrective systems could adapt. The keepers realized they were approaching a threshold. Magic was no longer endangered by ignorance alone, it was endangered by scale. One mistake could now be seen by thousands. One anomaly could be documented, analyzed, repeated. Secrecy required speed. Speed required coordination, and coordination inevitably requires structure. The guardians resisted this realization. They remembered what structure had once done, how dominance crept in under the promise of safety. But magic itself offered guidance. In places where corrective systems were shared, where responsibility was acknowledged collectively, magic grew calmer. In places where intervention was resisted, instability followed. Once again, reality chose a direction before philosophy could argue. The keepers began to consider something radical, not rule by force, but formal agreement with consequence. Not law in the non-magical sense, but magical law. Guidelines reinforced not by threat, but by alignment with how magic actually behaves. They did not yet know what this would look like, but they knew one thing with certainty. Magic could no longer survive on trust alone. The shape of law without chains. When the idea of law first entered the wizarding world, it was met not with excitement, but with grief. Those who remembered the earliest ages knew what law could become when divorced from understanding. They had seen power hardened into command, and command mistaken for wisdom, so they refused to build walls. Instead, they asked a different question. What kind of structure does magic already obey? The answer was not found in councils or decrees. It was found in patterns. Magic responds to clarity. It weakens under coercion. It stabilizes when intention aligns with consequence. It resists scale unless guided collectively. These truths had repeated themselves for centuries. They were not beliefs, they were observations. So the first framework of magical law was not written as prohibition, it was written as description. Rather than saying, "you must not," it said, "this is what happens when." Rather than threatening punishment, it outlined consequence. This is the defining difference between magical law and non-magical law. Non-magical law attempts to control behavior. Magical law attempts to predict reality. The earliest frameworks took the form of shared principles, carefully phrased, deliberately incomplete. They described when concealment was required, not because exposure was immoral, but because magic destabilized under scrutiny. They explained why certain forms of magic should never be practiced alone, not because they were forbidden, but because isolation fractured judgment. They clarified that magic affecting memory, perception, or identity carried consequences beyond the caster, and therefore required collective awareness. These principles were taught, not enforced, and yet something remarkable happened. Communities that followed them found their magic growing easier to maintain. Corrective intervention became rarer. Instability softened before it spread. Communities that ignored them experienced increasing resistance, spells requiring more effort, concealment fraying, accidents growing harder to contain. Magic was enforcing the framework without anyone raising a hand. This revealed a deep system at the heart of wizarding reality. Magical law is emergent, not imposed. It arises from the interaction between intent, method, and consequence. Codifying it does not create it, it only makes it visible. As these principles spread, guardians changed again. They no longer traveled only in response to imbalance, they became interpreters. When something went wrong, they did not ask who was at fault. They asked which principle had been misunderstood. Correction shifted from reaction to prevention. Education deepened. Language sharpened. The wizarding world began to share a conceptual grammar, not of spells, but of responsibility. This grammar made coordination possible. For the first time, communities could act together without centralized command. And yet, even this delicate framework had limits. Principles require interpretation. Interpretation varies with perspective, and perspective over time drifts. Disagreements emerged, not about whether secrecy mattered, but about how strictly it should be applied. Not about whether intervention was necessary, but who should decide when. These disagreements were calm but persistent. Magic responded by growing tense in contested regions, not violent, uncertain. It was becoming clear that while magic without chains was possible, it required anchors, points of reference that could outlast individuals, places where principles were preserved, debated, refined. The unnamed school, long since named now, naturally became one such anchor. Others followed. Learning centers began to share records. Guardians compared interpretations. Memory was no longer isolated. This was not centralization, it was convergence. The wizarding world was not becoming one authority, it was becoming one conversation. And in that conversation, a final realization emerged. If magic was to survive alongside a world that no longer believed in it, secrecy could not rely on agreement alone. It would need formal guardianship, not to rule magic, but to stand between it and those who would break it through certainty or spectacle. When guardianship took form, institutions are often born loudly through declarations, banners, and the certainty of authority. This one was not. It emerged the way moss grows on stone, slowly, quietly, in response to conditions that made it necessary. By the time the idea of formal guardianship was spoken aloud, the actual practice already existed.
Guardians were traveling regularly. Principles were being shared across regions. Records, carefully abstracted, deliberately incomplete, were being preserved in multiple places at once. What was missing was not function, but continuity. When one guardian failed, who replaced them? When interpretations differed, where could resolution be found without dominance? When secrecy was threatened across borders, who spoke for magic as a whole? These questions did not demand rulers, they demanded stewards. So the keepers agreed on something subtle but enduring, a standing body whose sole purpose was to observe, remember, and intervene only when alignment failed. Not to govern daily magic, not to dictate education,
not to claim authority over spellcraft, only to protect the conditions under which magic could continue to exist quietly. This body had no single seat, no capital, no permanent center of power. It existed where it was needed. Members were chosen not by rank, but by trust accumulated over time. They were often older, but not always. They were selected for restraint, for clarity under pressure, for their ability to leave no trace when their work was done. This is the origin of formal magical guardianship, and it came with a rule more important than any other. Intervention must be invisible. If a guardian's presence became known, they had already failed. Corrective magic refined further during this age. Memory work became gentler, more precise. Rather than altering events, it altered interpretation. Witnesses remembered what they expected to remember. Records contained gaps that felt natural rather than suspicious. Questions dissolved into more convenient explanations. This was not deception in the crude sense, it was contextual realignment. Magic does not erase truth, it relocates it. Here we encounter another defining system of the wizarding world. Truth is not lost when hidden, only deferred. Magical concealment preserves reality for those who are prepared to encounter it later. At the same time, guardians refined their understanding of when not to act. Some exposures were allowed to fade naturally. Some anomalies were left unexplained. Not every mystery required correction. Magic thrives when uncertainty is tolerated. This restraint distinguished guardians from enforcers. They did not seek to eliminate risk entirely. They sought to keep risk within survivable bounds. As guardianship matured, magical communities began to rely on it without surrendering autonomy. They knew intervention would come only when necessary and only to restore balance, not impose order. This trust allowed secrecy to deepen. Children were taught earlier about the existence of a wider hidden world, not as an authority to fear, but as a safety net. Teachers could focus on education rather than constant vigilance. Communities could innovate carefully without fearing isolation. Magic responded by becoming more stable than it had been in centuries. Yet stability invites complacency, and complacency, as magic has always taught, is simply certainty in disguise. Beyond the hidden world, the non-magical one was changing faster than ever before. Writing spread, knowledge accumulated, patterns were analyzed rather than lived with. The methods of observation grew sharper, and somewhere within that sharpening gaze, magic felt the pressure returning. The guardians sensed it too. Secrecy had become robust. Law had become emergent. Guardianship had taken form. But something was approaching that would test it all at once. When the world learned to watch. Magic has always known when it is being observed, not in the simple sense of being seen, but in the deeper sense of being measured. Curiosity looks and wonders, fear looks and recoils, but measurement looks with intent to repeat, to isolate cause from effect, to remove mystery piece by piece. This was new. The non-magical world was no longer content with stories that faded into folklore. It began to record, compare, and verify. Ink replaced memory. Patterns were preserved rather than allowed to soften. Magic felt this shift long before it became visible. Subtle anomalies that once dissolved into myth now lingered in ledgers and notes. Witnesses compared accounts. Questions did not fade, they accumulated. Magic responds poorly to accumulation. The guardians noticed concealment spells requiring more upkeep. Perceptual misdirection worked, but not effortlessly as before. Memory realignment needed greater delicacy. This was not failure, it was resistance. Magic was approaching the limit of how far it could retreat without becoming fragmented. Here we encounter a profound truth about the wizarding world. Magic cannot exist entirely apart from belief. It does not require belief to function, but belief smooths its passage through reality. Disbelief, when systematic and confident, creates friction. The non-magical world was not rejecting magic emotionally.
It was replacing wonder with certainty, and certainty is hostile terrain. The Guardians gathered more frequently now, not in panic, but in recognition. They spoke of a future where concealment alone would not suffice, where magic would not be discovered, but explained away. This posed a greater danger than exposure. If magic were reduced to anomaly, to error, to misinterpretation, its deeper systems would fracture. Magic survives through meaning. Stripped of meaning, it becomes unstable. The Guardians faced a choice, as grave as the First Covenant. They could retreat further, tighten concealment, limit magic's footprint to the smallest possible enclaves. Or they could adapt, not by revealing magic, but by redefining how it interacted with a watching world. They chose adaptation, not immediately, not unanimously, but inevitably. The first step was restraint. Large-scale magic was discouraged. Permanent alterations became rare. Effects that left persistent traces were avoided. Magic learned to pass through the world rather than settle into it. This is why modern wizarding magic often feels fleeting. Light flashes, brief transformations, effects that resolve cleanly. It is not because magic grew weaker, it is because it grew careful. The second step was internal refinement. Magical education began to emphasize invisibility of impact as much as success of outcome. A spell was not considered mastered unless it left no unintended trace. This changed spell design itself. Incantations shortened, gestures minimized, tools refined to reduce magical spillover. Magic was learning efficiency, not for speed, but for subtlety. The third step was philosophical. Guardians taught a new understanding. Magic was no longer something that could afford to linger openly in the world. It had to move like breath, present, essential, and unnoticed unless sought by those who knew how to listen. This reframing preserved meaning while accepting limitation. Magic does not resent limitation when limitation preserves coherence. Yet, even as adaptation progressed, a question remained unresolved. How do you protect a hidden world from a world that no longer believes in hidden things? The answer would not come from magic alone. It would come from agreement between guardians, educators, and communities to draw a final, unmistakable boundary. Not a retreat, a line. The line that was never meant to be crossed. The line was not drawn in ink. It could not have been. Ink invites revision, debate, interpretation. This line was drawn in intent. By the time the Guardians spoke of it openly, everyone already felt it forming. Magic had become quieter, more efficient, less forgiving of carelessness. The world beyond magic had become louder, more precise, less tolerant of mystery. The two were no longer drifting apart, they were moving in different directions. The Guardians understood that concealment, adaptation, and restraint were no longer enough on their own. A boundary had to exist not as a wall, but as a shared understanding that could not be casually undone. This was the moment when secrecy ceased to be a practice and became a principle. Magic would no longer accommodate explanation. It would no longer linger in forms that invited analysis. It would not bend itself to be understood by those who demanded certainty over meaning. This was not abandonment of the world. It was refusal of reduction. The boundary worked through alignment rather than force. Magical actions that risked sustained exposure began to encounter resistance at a fundamental level. Spells misfired subtly. Concentration faltered. Opportunities dissolved before they could be seized. This was not sabotage by guardians. It was magic itself responding to the collective decision. Here lies one of the deepest systems of the wizarding world.
Magic follows the consensus of those who live with it, not through vote or decree, but through cumulative intent reinforced over time. Once the boundary was accepted widely enough, magic reorganized itself around it. Hidden paths grew harder to stumble upon accidentally. Enchanted creatures adjusted their ranges. Attuned places became less responsive to untrained presence. Magic did not hide by shrinking, it hid by realigning probability. The Guardians refined their role again. They were no longer simply interveners or interpreters. They became maintainers of the line, not watching every act of magic, that would have been impossible, but monitoring the health of the boundary itself. Where pressure built, they relieved it. Where curiosity sharpened, they softened context. Where magical activity risked permanence, they redirected rather than erase. Education changed accordingly. Students were taught early that some questions were not meant to be answered publicly, not because knowledge was forbidden, but because context matters more than truth. A truth without the capacity to hold it becomes distortion. This teaching did not diminish curiosity, it refined it. Young magic users learned that secrecy was not shame, it was stewardship. The hidden world did not exist because magic feared the non-magical one. It existed because magic refused to be flattened into something smaller than itself. As this understanding settled, something unexpected occurred. Magic spatialized more deeply than ever before. Concealment required less effort. Corrective intervention became rare. Communities functioned with confidence rather than caution. The boundary, once drawn, allowed magic to rest. Yet even this final line was never meant to be absolute. The Guardians knew, as the earliest keepers had known, that magic cannot be locked away forever. It can only be held until the world is ready to meet it without trying to own it. This awareness shaped the final element of the boundary, a door, not open, not closed, but remembered, hidden in stories, in symbols, in the quiet education of those born with the capacity to listen. The line was drawn, but it was drawn with care, so that one day, if the world changed again, magic would know where to soften. What the first magic truly was. To understand the first magic ever cast, we must let go of the idea that it was an act. It was not a spell, not a gesture, not even a moment that could be clearly separated from what came before or after. It was a relationship. Long before the line was drawn, before guardians, before covenants, before secrecy, magic existed as a listening presence in the world. Responsive, unshaped, unfinished. The earliest humans did not command it, they did not name it, they did not even know it was there. And because of that, magic met them without resistance. The first magic ever cast occurred when a human experienced intent without the desire to control outcome, fear without domination, hope without demand, need without certainty. In that moment, magic flowed freely, not because it was forced, but because nothing blocked it. This is the most important system in all of wizarding history. Magic emerges most clearly in the absence of certainty. Every structure that followed, words, tools, schools, laws, secrecy, exists not to replace that origin, but to protect it from erosion. Modern spellcasting feels deliberate because it must be. The world no longer tolerates raw emergence, certainty presses too hard, observation lingers too long. So magic adapted. Incantations became agreements, wands became regulators, education became timing rather than instruction, law became description rather than command. But beneath every spoken spell, beneath every practiced movement, the same condition still applies. Magic listens first. It listens for clarity without force, for intention without hunger, for action that accepts consequence rather than denying it. This is why the most powerful magic often feels effortless to the caster, not because it is easy, but because nothing inside them resists release. And this is why the most dangerous magic feels heavy even when successful,
because it is shaped against the grain of how magic wishes to move. The first magic was not lost, it was contained, preserved through restraint, hidden through humility, carried forward in education, ethics, and secrecy. Every accidental spark in a child's fear, every spell that succeeds without strain, every moment when magic seems to respond before words are finished, these are echoes. The world changed, magic changed with it, but the relationship remains. The first magic ever cast was the moment a human realized, without understanding how, that the world could respond if they did not try to own the answer. And that truth, more than any spell or law, is what still governs the wizarding world today. The echo that never faded. Even after the line was drawn, even after secrecy settled into permanence, magic never became silent. It became attentive. In the modern wizarding world, long after guardianship, long after schools and structure, magic still reveals its oldest nature in the smallest moments. A candle flares brighter than intended when emotion slips through discipline. A charm succeeds despite imperfect words because intention remains clear. A spell falters not from error, but from inner resistance the caster cannot yet name. These moments are not flaws in magic, they are reminders. Magic has never been impressed by precision alone. It responds to coherence between thought, feeling, and acceptance. This is why even the most advanced spell work still begins with centering, breath, focus, release. These are not habits, they are inheritances. The Guardians understood this when they shaped education. They did not merely teach spells, they taught how to approach uncertainty without fear. Students learned that doubt is not weakness when it opens awareness. They learned that confidence is dangerous when it refuses consequence. This balance preserved magic's responsiveness even as structure grew dense around it.
One of the most enduring systems born from this understanding was the separation between knowledge and readiness. A spell can be known long before it should be cast. A theory can be understood long before it should be tested. Magic does not punish ignorance, it reacts to premature certainty. This is why advancement in the wizarding world has never been purely linear. Progress stalls intentionally. Pauses are built into learning. Magic needs space to settle between steps. Without these pauses, power accumulates faster than meaning, and meaning, once lost, cannot be restored by force. The hidden world lives by this rhythm. Outwardly, it appears static. Traditions repeat, institutions endure, but beneath that surface, magic is constantly adjusting, responding to shifts in belief, to the quiet evolution of human intention. The Guardians still watch, but they intervene less than ever before, not because danger has vanished, but because alignment has grown stronger. Secrecy is no longer fragile, it is woven into habit, language, and expectation. Yet the door remains. It exists not in any one place, but in the continued practice of restraint, in the refusal to reduce magic to spectacle or proof, in the willingness to let mystery remain unresolved. This is why the wizarding world endures without needing to announce itself. It survives because it remembers what the first magic taught, that power revealed too eagerly loses its meaning, that truth forced into certainty fractures under its own weight. Magic does not seek to be known, it seeks to be met. And so it waits, not behind walls, but behind readiness. Every spell spoken today still carries that ancient echo. Every wand movement traces a path first shaped by unspoken intent. The first magic ever cast was not an origin that vanished into history. It was a beginning that never truly ended. The quiet discipline of remembering. As centuries settled into one another, the wizarding world learned a skill far subtler than spellcasting. It learned how to remember without clinging. This discipline did not concern facts alone, it concerned posture.
how the mind holds what it knows without insisting on proving it. Magic depends on this posture. Too much attachment turns knowledge rigid. Too little dissolves it into myth. Between them lies remembrance, active, living, and deliberately incomplete. This is why wizarding history is never fully linear. Events are taught through overlapping accounts. Dates blur at the edges. Names shift slightly between regions. This is not negligence, it is protection. Magic resists being pinned to a single narrative. When history becomes too precise, it invites reenactment without understanding. The Guardians encouraged this gentle ambiguity deliberately, not to obscure truth, but to preserve interpretive space, room for each generation to encounter meaning rather than inherit certainty. This practice shaped how magical institutions preserved their past. Archives were layered. Some texts described outcomes, others described conditions. Very few described methods completely. Reading became an act of participation, not consumption. Here we see another core system of the wizarding world. Knowledge matures through interpretation, not accumulation. A young student might read a passage and understand only its surface. Years later, the same words would reveal something else entirely. The text had not changed, the reader had. This is why magical education never ends with mastery. Graduation marks readiness to continue learning alone, not completion. The first magic ever cast set this pattern long ago, because that magic did not offer explanation, only response. Modern magic still behaves this way. It answers what is asked, not what is wanted. And it answers most clearly when the question is shaped with humility. In advanced practice, many wizards and witches eventually rediscover what the earliest keepers sensed instinctively. The most powerful refinement is often restraint. A spell not cast can preserve balance longer than one cast perfectly. A secret not spoken can protect truth better than one explained endlessly. This is why the wizarding world moves slowly, why innovation is cautious, why spectacle is rare. Magic is not afraid of change, it is wary of speed. Speed compresses consequence. Magic requires space for consequence to unfold. The Guardians still teach this, not as a rule, but as a rhythm. Pause before casting. Pause after success. Pause especially after failure. These pauses are where magic teaches back. They are also where the echo of the first magic is still most clearly heard. That original response, unforced, unnamed, unclaimed, set a tempo the wizarding world has never fully abandoned. Beneath all structure, beneath secrecy and law and learning, magic still prefers to move at the pace of breath. The magic that lives between spells. In the modern wizarding world, most magic is never cast. This surprises many who first learn the craft.
They imagine a life shaped by constant enchantment, by light and motion and visible power. Instead, they discover something quieter. Magic lives most fully in the moments between spells. A witch pauses before speaking, sensing that a word spoken now would harden a future that should remain fluid. A wizard chooses not to repair a minor flaw instantly, allowing time and patience to complete what magic could rush. These decisions are not moral gestures, they are technical ones, because magic does not measure power by how often it is used, but by how well it remains available. This reveals one of the least discussed systems of the wizarding world, magical conservation. Every act of magic alters probability. It nudges the world slightly away from its unshaped state. Used carefully, this creates harmony. Used excessively, it creates resistance. Modern practitioners are taught, often without being told, to notice this resistance. When spells feel heavier than expected, when outcomes require more effort, when magic answers correctly but without warmth. These are signs not of failure but of overpresence. Magic, like conversation, needs silence to remain meaningful. This understanding shapes daily wizarding life. Homes are not constantly enchanted. Tools are used sparingly. Even protective wards are designed to rest, activating only when needed rather than pressing endlessly against the world. This is why ancient magical homes often feel calmer than newly enchanted ones. Their magic has learned when to sleep. Children growing up in such environments absorb this rhythm instinctively. They learn that magic is not urgency, it is availability. Accidental magic still occurs, but it is gentler than in earlier ages, not weaker, but more contextual. The child who breaks glass in anger learns not only control, but timing. They sense when magic wants to act and when it wants to wait. This sensitivity is not taught directly, it is mirrored. Teachers model restraint, guardians model disappearance, communities model continuity, and magic follows. Even conflict within the wizarding world reflects this principle. Duels are rare, not because power is lacking, but because confrontation compresses consequence too quickly. Magic cast in haste leaves little room for correction. When conflict cannot be avoided, it is bounded carefully. Witnesses are limited, environments are chosen, spells are shaped to end rather than escalate. This is not fear, it is technical respect. Magic behaves differently when it senses intention to conclude. In this way, the wizarding world still honors the first magic ever cast, the moment when intent was clear but outcome was not demanded. Every modern practitioner, no matter how trained, eventually learns the same quiet truth. Magic is most reliable when it is not rushed to perform. It prefers to be consulted, not commanded. And so, between spells, between words, between decisions, magic continues to listen. Those who guard without titles. Not every guardian wears the weight of guardianship openly. In fact, most do not. As the wizarding world matured, formal structures learned an important limitation. They could guide behavior, but they could not cultivate character. And magic has always responded more strongly to character than to compliance. So alongside institutions, another kind of guardianship quietly endured, one that never accepted a name. These were witches and wizards who understood magic deeply enough to step back from it without resentment, who sensed imbalance not through alarms or reports, but through atmosphere, the subtle way a place felt too tense or a spell lingered longer than it should. They did not intervene dramatically, they adjusted, a word spoken differently, a lesson delayed, a story told at the right moment so that someone else would choose restraint on their own. This is the most refined form of magical stewardship, indirect correction. Magic responds best when change arises from insight rather than enforcement. These quiet guardians appear throughout wizarding history without ever being recorded as such. Teachers who discourage a promising student from advancing too quickly. Healers who refuse to force recovery, choosing instead to strengthen what already exists. Travelers who notice a place growing unstable and simply stop returning, allowing magic to disperse naturally. They do not prevent mistakes, they prevent momentum. Momentum is the true danger in magic. A single miscast spell can be corrected. A pattern of misjudgment hardens quickly. By softening momentum, these unnamed guardians preserve flexibility for people, for places, and for magic itself. This practice reflects the oldest covenant more clearly than any written law ever could, because the first promise made to magic was not obedience, it was attentiveness. The modern wizarding world still depends on this attentiveness more than any institution.
Laws describe consequence. Guardians intervene when alignment fails. But it is these unnamed stewards who prevent failure from becoming inevitable. They understand something institutions often forget. Magic cannot be protected solely from the outside. It must be protected from within the choices of those who use it. This is why power in the wizarding world has never fully centralized, why even the most influential schools produce graduates encouraged to leave, to disperse,
to carry restraint outward rather than gather authority inward. Magic does not thrive in concentration, it thrives in distribution. And so these individuals remain rare, uncelebrated, indispensable. They carry no badge, they answer to no council, yet their influence can be felt decades later in places that never collapsed, in conflicts that never escalated, in spells that were never cast because someone sensed they did not need to be. This too is magic, the kind that leaves no trace except stability. Where the story comes to rest, every long story, if it is honest, does not end with resolution, it ends with stillness. After all the shaping, after the guardians, the laws, the schools, the quiet stewards, magic returns again and again to the same simple condition it began with: listening. In the modern wizarding world, most days pass without event. No great enchantments are cast, no boundaries are tested, no lines are crossed. And this is not failure, it is success. Magic has reached a state where it does not need to prove itself, where it does not need to withdraw further, nor press forward again. It rests within the rhythm of lives that know how to carry it. A witch preparing tea chooses a moment of calm before stirring, not because a spell demands it, but because experience has taught her that magic prefers readiness to urgency. A wizard repairing an old roof uses a charm lightly, then lets time finish the work, trusting that the world still knows how to hold itself. A teacher notices a student's impatience and assigns no punishment, only a pause, knowing that delay is sometimes the most precise correction. None of these moments are recorded, none will ever appear in history, and yet they are the living continuation of the first magic ever cast. Because that first magic was never about power entering the world, it was about relationship being recognized. The world responded because it was not being demanded of. That truth has survived every age. It survived the rise of structure. It survived secrecy. It survived observation, skepticism, and certainty. It survives now in the quiet confidence of a hidden world that does not need to announce itself. The wizarding world endures not because it is protected by spells, but because it remembers what kind of attention magic can bear. And so the story rests where it began, not in fire or light, not in words or symbols, but in a moment of unclaimed intent, where a human presence meets the world gently enough for the world to answer back. That answer is still given every day to those who know how to listen. The listening world. Even now, long after stillness has settled into habit, the world continues to listen. Not everywhere, not to everyone, but in certain moments when intention is clear and unclaimed, the old responsiveness stirs. A path opens more easily than expected. A storm weakens just enough to allow safe passage. A word spoken gently reshapes a conflict before it has time to harden. These are not miracles, they are alignments. Modern magic users learn to recognize them without naming them aloud. They sense when magic has already moved and choose not to interrupt. This is one of the most advanced disciplines of the wizarding world, non-interference. To act only when action adds clarity, to refrain when the world is already responding. This discipline cannot be enforced, it cannot be taught directly, it must be absorbed. That absorption happens slowly, through watching elders who do less, not more, through living in places where magic feels settled rather than strained, through witnessing consequences unfold naturally instead of being corrected immediately. Magic respects this patience. In fact, it depends on it, Because magic is not a tool that improves with use alone. It improves with contextual silence, spaces where it is allowed to remain potential rather than outcome. This is why the wizarding world has always valued gardens over towers, libraries over laboratories, walks over lectures. These environments cultivate a shared sensitivity to when magic is already present and when it is better left untouched. Even the guardians, those whose role is intervention, spend most of their time doing nothing at all. They observe, they listen, they wait for imbalance to reveal itself clearly before responding. This waiting is not passivity, it is precision. Act too early and you prevent learning. Act too late and you allow harm to compound. The balance lies in timing, the same balance that shaped the first magic ever cast.
Because that first response from the world did not arrive instantly. It arrived when intent had settled and expectation had loosened. The modern wizarding world survives because it continues to honor that timing, even when everything else pressures it to hurry. And so, magic remains available, not because it is demanded, but because it is trusted. When magic moves first, there are moments, rare, unannounced, often noticed only in hindsight, when magic acts without being summoned. These moments unsettle even experienced practitioners, not because they are dangerous, but because they remind the wizarding world of something it prefers to forget. Magic is not inert. It has never been merely reactive. It has always possessed a kind of momentum, a tendency to flow toward balance when imbalance becomes too sharp to ignore. In the earliest ages, this momentum appeared as sudden warmth, unexpected healing, a flame that refused to die. In the modern world, it appears far more subtly. A spell miscast in anger simply fails, but later succeeds when repeated calmly, without conscious adjustment. A conflict escalates toward violence, then dissolves when a single conversation takes an unexpected turn. A hidden place remains undiscovered despite deliberate search, not through concealment, but through improbable distraction. These are not coincidences. They are preemptive alignments. Magic senses when certain outcomes would fracture the structures it depends on, meaning, continuity, restraint, and it gently shifts probability before action becomes irreversible. This reveals one of the deepest, least spoken truths of the wizarding world. Magic is not neutral, it is conservative. Not in ideology, but in preservation. It favors futures that allow it to continue existing quietly. It resists paths that would force it into spectacle, domination, or extinction. This is why attempts to weaponize magic at scale have always collapsed, not immediately, but inevitably. Magic does not rebel, it redirects. Those rare moments when magic moves first are often misinterpreted as fate, luck, or coincidence. But experienced practitioners recognize them by their texture. They feel light, as if something heavy has been lifted before it fully settled. These moments teach an advanced discipline that no school formally names. Trust the correction you did not cast. When magic intervenes on its own, it is offering collaboration, not surrender of agency, but shared responsibility. To fight that correction is to work against the grain of reality itself. To accept it is to preserve flexibility. This is why the most seasoned witches and wizards sometimes stop mid-spell. They sense that the world has already answered and that further action would only obscure the response. In these moments, magic is not demonstrating power, it is demonstrating confidence. Confidence that those who live with it have learned enough restraint to notice when they are no longer needed. This confidence did not arise quickly. It was earned across centuries through hesitation, failure, adaptation, and the willingness to let mystery remain unresolved. The Guardians understand this better than anyone. They do not see magic as a system to be maintained, but as a partner that occasionally steps forward when silence alone is insufficient. And when magic does step forward, it never does so loudly. It moves first only just enough. A nudge, a pause,
a missed opportunity that turns out to be mercy. These are the moments that shape the future of the wizarding world without ever appearing in its records. They are also the moments that suggest something quietly hopeful, that magic, having learned to withdraw, to hide, to wait, has not grown passive, it has grown selective. And in that selectivity lies the possibility of a future where magic and the wider world might one day approach one another again, not through revelation, but through readiness. What must remain true. If there is ever to be another meeting between magic and the wider world, it will not begin with discovery. It will begin with capacity. Magic has learned across long ages that revelation without readiness leads only to reduction. Wonder is examined until it becomes mechanism. Mystery is pressed until it becomes tool. So the conditions for return are not external, they are internal. The wizarding world understands this quietly. It does not wait for the world to believe in magic again. Belief is too easily bent, too easily claimed. What matters is something subtler, the ability to encounter power without immediately seeking ownership. This is the condition that shaped the first magic ever cast, and it remains the condition for any future unfolding. Magic watches for it, not in crowds or movements, but in individuals. In the non-magical world, there are still moments when this capacity appears. A scientist who pauses before publication, sensing that explanation might close a door that should remain open a little longer. An artist who refuses to name what their work means, trusting the audience to meet it where it stands. A listener who does not interrupt silence with certainty. These moments are not magical, but they are compatible with magic. Compatibility matters more than belief ever did. This is why the line between worlds was never meant to be permanent in spirit, only in practice. It exists not to divide truth, but to protect tempo. Magic moves slowly, not because it is old, but because consequence unfolds slowly. Any world that cannot tolerate delayed outcome, unresolved meaning, or unanswered questions cannot hold magic without tearing it. So magic waits, not for technology to fail, not for society to collapse, not for belief to return. It waits for a posture of mind that recognizes limits as conditions for depth, not obstacles to mastery. The wizarding world preserves this posture internally so that it is not lost entirely. Children are taught patience before proficiency, silence before speech, observation before action, not as virtue, but as technical necessity. Magic does not thrive in urgency, it thrives in room. This is why the hidden world appears unchanged from the outside. It is not stagnant, it is holding space, and holding space is an active discipline. The Guardians know that if magic ever meets the wider world again, it will not arrive as spectacle. It will arrive the same way it always has, as a response to unclaimed intent. Someone, somewhere, will encounter a moment where force would be easier, certainty more comfortable, explanation more rewarding, and they will choose otherwise. They will leave the question open. They will let the world answer back. And in that space, that brief, fragile openness, magic will recognize something familiar. Not mastery, not belief, readiness. Until then, the line holds, not as exclusion, but as care. And the first magic ever cast continues its quiet work, not shaping outcomes, but preserving the conditions under which shaping remains possible at all. The waiting that is not empty waiting. In the wizarding world, waiting has never meant absence. It means attention without demand. And as long as that readiness is preserved in individuals, in teaching, in restraint, the first magic ever cast remains alive, not as memory, not as legend, but as a condition the world can still meet. The knowledge that refuses to hurry. There is a kind of knowledge that only appears when nothing is being chased. In the wizarding world, this knowledge is respected more than any spell, not because it grants power, but because it teaches when power is unnecessary. As magic settled into long-term waiting, those who lived with it noticed a subtle shift in how understanding itself behaved. Answers arrived later than expected, sometimes years later, yet when they did, they fit more cleanly than anything forced into clarity too soon. A student would struggle for a long time with a concept that refused to resolve. Then, one quiet evening, while doing something entirely unrelated, the understanding would surface fully formed. Not sudden, not dramatic, just present. Magic responds to this kind of learning with particular ease because it mirrors magic's own process. Magic does not solve problems. It reframes conditions until the problem no longer applies. This is why advanced magical theory often reads like philosophy rather than instruction. It describes relationships, tensions, balances, not steps. Those who learn to think this way begin to sense magic long before they attempt to shape it. They notice when a place feels overworked, when a question has been asked too often, when an answer would close more doors than it opens, and they choose to wait. This waiting is not passive, it is informed. It carries memory, experience, and awareness. It is the same waiting that preceded the first magic ever cast. Back then, there was no concept of spell or system, only a human presence not insisting on outcome. Now, after centuries of refinement, the wizarding world has returned to that posture, not out of ignorance, but out of understanding. Magic has completed a long circle, not by undoing what was built, but by placing it lightly enough that the original responsiveness can still breathe beneath it. This is why even the most complex magical workings are ultimately grounded in simple, repeatable human acts: breathing, pausing, listening. The structures exist to prevent harm, to preserve continuity, to protect magic from certainty, but they are not the source. The source has always been the space between decision and demand, and that space is still guarded, not by walls, not by law alone, but by habit. When a wizard sets aside a wand and chooses conversation instead, when a witch delays a working until emotion settles, when a guardian observes without immediately correcting, these are not small moments, they are the living infrastructure of the hidden world. As long as they continue, magic does not need to rush back into the open. It does not need to defend itself. It does not need to prove relevance. It simply remains. Where choice and magic overlap. At a certain depth of practice, magic becomes difficult to separate from the person who carries it. Not because power has fused with identity, but because choice has learned the shape of consequence. In the early ages, magic answered raw intent. In the structured ages, it responded to form and discipline. In the hidden ages, it adapted to restraint and secrecy. Now, in this quieter era, magic often responds before a spell is considered. A practitioner senses the weight of a decision and adjusts course without conscious calculation. They step back from an argument that would have invited escalation. They choose patience where urgency would have felt justified. From the outside, this appears mundane. From within, it feels like alignment. This is not intuition alone, it is trained responsiveness, the result of living long enough with magic's feedback to internalize its preferences. Here lies a truth rarely spoken even among guardians. The highest form of magic is not casting, it is selection. Choosing which realities to allow momentum and which to let dissolve quietly. At this level, the distinction between magical and non-magical action blurs. A decision made without spell work can carry more magical consequence than a complex incantation. Magic recognizes this. It treats aligned choice as already complete work. This is why some of the most influential figures in wizarding history are barely remembered as powerful. They were remembered, if at all, as calm, measured, unremarkable. And yet, entire chains of events shifted around them, because magic does not need to be expressed when it is already embedded in judgment. This embedding is fragile. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be taught directly. It emerges only when a person has seen enough outcomes to respect delay. This is why mastery takes so long, why impatience disqualifies more practitioners than lack of talent ever could. Magic does not test intelligence, it tests timing. In those who pass this test, magic becomes almost invisible, not absent, but folded neatly into decision-making itself. They cast fewer spells, they leave fewer traces, they attract little attention, and yet magic remains exceptionally responsive around them, not because they command it, but because they have stopped fighting its tempo. This is the quiet destination toward which all wizarding education bends, even if it never names it outright. To live in a way that does not require frequent correction. To act so that magic does not need to intervene. To choose in rhythm with consequence rather than against it. The first magic ever cast was born in that same overlap, where a human did not demand change, but allowed response. Now, after everything that followed, the wizarding world has learned how to return there without losing what was built along the way. The circle that was never closed. There is a difference between ending a journey and arriving somewhere familiar. The wizarding world did not progress in a straight line. It moved in a widening arc, outward into structure, inward into restraint, and finally back towards simplicity without losing memory. This is why, at its deepest level, magic today resembles its first expression more than its most elaborate inventions. Not because knowledge was undone, but because excess was released. The first magic ever cast required no permission, no language, no authority. It occurred because the world was allowed to answer freely. Everything that followed, schools, guardians, secrecy, law, exists to preserve that freedom in a world that no longer grants it easily. The circle was never meant to close. Closure implies completion. Magic resists completion. Instead, the circle remains open, wide enough to admit change, narrow enough to protect meaning. This openness shapes the wizarding world's relationship with the future. No prophecy is treated as absolute, no innovation is adopted without patience, no tradition is preserved without asking whether it still serves balance. Magic does not move forward by accumulating answers, it moves forward by refining questions. This is why, even now, the most respected teachers end their lessons without conclusions, why archives contain contradictions, why history is told in overlapping versions. These are not flaws, they are breathing spaces, places where magic can still enter the conversation without being trapped by it. And magic does enter, quietly, often unnoticed, in the pauses that follow, in the silence after a difficult choice, in the hesitation before a decisive act, in the moment someone chooses not to use magic because the world has already begun to adjust. These moments carry no glow, no incantation, yet they shape reality more enduringly than any spectacle ever could. This is how the wizarding world endures without needing to expand, conquer, or reveal itself. It endures by matching the world's pace only when the world slows enough to listen. The first magic ever cast was not an origin story meant to be surpassed. It was a reminder, quietly carried forward, of how the world prefers to be met, not seized, not solved, not stripped of mystery, but approached with enough restraint to let response remain possible. The story does not end here because magic does not end. It simply continues wherever someone chooses to leave space instead of certainty. The silence that knows your name. There was a particular kind of silence that only appears after long familiarity.
It is not empty, it is recognition. In places where magic has been lived with gently for generations, this silence settles like a presence that does not intrude. Rooms feel complete even when unoccupied. Paths seem to anticipate footsteps before they arrive. Nothing calls for attention, yet nothing feels forgotten. This silence knows who belongs within it. Modern magic users learn, often unconsciously, to distinguish this silence from mere absence. Absence feels hollow, it invites filling, it demands action. Recognitive silence does the opposite. It reassures, it suggests that nothing is required. Magic behaves differently here. Spells cast in such places require less correction afterward. Emotional spillover dissipates more quickly. Intent settles before it can fracture. This is not coincidence. Magic aligns most easily where it is not constantly summoned. These environments are cultivated slowly, not through enchantment alone, but through repeated restraint. A door not warded unnecessarily, a room left unaltered when alteration is possible, a choice made to live with imperfection rather than override it. Each of these decisions teaches magic that it is trusted, and magic, when trusted, stops testing boundaries. This trust forms the quiet backbone of wizarding continuity. It is why certain families produce practitioners whose magic feels calm even when powerful, why some locations remain stable despite centuries of use, why a few teachers seem to change students without ever demonstrating anything impressive. They operate within recognitive silence. They do not provoke magic, they allow it to recognize them in return. This recognition is not sentimental, it is functional. Magic responds faster, cleaner, and with fewer side effects when it senses continuity rather than urgency. This is why advanced practitioners often seem slow. They pause longer than necessary. They consider options that appear obvious. They are not hesitating. They are listening for whether the silence has already answered.
The first magic ever cast emerged from this same condition, a world not crowded by insistence, a moment not pressured by demand. Everything built since then exists to recreate that condition in a louder, faster age. And so the wizarding world persists not by expanding influence, but by curating quiet. The self that is not defined by power. In a world where magic is ever present yet rarely displayed, identity forms differently. Witches and wizards raised within cultivated quiet do not grow up thinking of themselves as people who can do things. They grow up thinking of themselves as people who notice. This distinction matters. When power becomes the center of identity, every choice turns into performance. Every failure feels like loss of self. Every restraint feels like denial. But when awareness comes first, magic becomes an extension rather than a definition. This is why many within the wizarding world struggle to describe themselves without reference to lineage, spellcraft, or achievement. Asked who they are, they speak of habits, of preferences, of how they move through the world. I like quiet mornings. I prefer listening before speaking. I do my best work when nothing is urgent. These answers may sound ordinary, but they reveal something profound. Magic has not replaced the self, it has receded into it. This internalization is the final stage of the long evolution that began with the first magic ever cast. In the beginning, magic appeared as response. Later, it became skill, then responsibility, then restraint. Now, for those who live with it fully, magic becomes orientation. It does not ask to be used, it asks to be considered. This changes how conflict is experienced. Disagreement does not immediately call for action. Danger does not automatically trigger force. Even injustice is approached with patience before intervention. Not because the wizarding world lacks courage, but because it understands escalation. Escalation narrows futures. Magic thrives where futures remain multiple. This is why so many pivotal moments in wizarding history feel anticlimactic when viewed from the outside. The duel that never happened, the spell prepared but never released, the revelation delayed until it lost urgency. Power was present, it simply did not define the moment. Those who reach this stage of alignment often find themselves difficult to classify. They do not seek leadership. They do not reject it either. They influence without directing. They correct without opposing. Magic flows around them as water flows around a stone, not because the stone is powerful, but because it is stable. This stability is not innate. It is cultivated over years of listening, of watching cause and consequence unfold, of choosing not to intervene until intervention is truly additive. The first magic ever cast did not belong to someone who wanted to change the world. It belonged to someone who allowed the world to answer. Now, centuries later, the wizarding world has learned how to raise individuals who can carry that posture within themselves without losing agency. They do not dissolve into passivity, they remain capable, but capability no longer demands expression. When such individuals leave attuned places and move quietly through the wider world, they often appear unremarkable, and that is precisely the point. Magic survives best when it does not need to announce who is carrying it. The future that is shaped by presence. The wizarding world does not plan its future the way other worlds do. There are no grand projections, no fixed destinies laid out in advance, no certainty about what must come next. This is not oversight, it is method. The future of magic has never been something to be engineered, it is something to be inhabited. Those raised within the quiet disciplines of listening grow into adults who influence the future without naming it as such. They do not ask what history will remember, they ask what the present can sustain. And magic, attentive as ever, follows that question. Change enters the wizarding world not through revolution, but through drift, a slow, almost imperceptible reorientation caused by many small choices aligning. A teacher alters how patience is modeled. A guardian delays intervention one breath longer than usual. A student chooses reflection over demonstration. None of these actions feel historic, yet together they shape what becomes possible. This is how the wizarding world remains resilient without becoming rigid, because rigidity belongs to systems that fear uncertainty. Magic does not fear uncertainty, it was born there. The first magic ever cast did not point toward a future, it responded to a present that was not being forced to conclude. That same responsiveness governs what lies ahead. If the wider world grows quieter, magic will notice. If certainty loosens its grip, magic will lean closer. If space opens for response rather than control, magic will remember how to answer. Until then, the wizarding world does not wait anxiously. It lives. It teaches children to notice when the world is already speaking. It trains practitioners to recognize when action would interfere. It preserves silence not as absence, but as potential. This is why, even after everything, after secrecy, guardianship, law, adaptation, magic has not diminished. It is concentrated, not in power, but in judgment, not in spectacle, but in timing. And so the future remains open in the only way magic has ever respected, unclaimed, unannounced, held gently enough to allow response. The story you have followed was never meant to move toward resolution. It was meant to move toward continuity, a continuity that does not require remembering every detail, only the posture that made the first moment possible. To listen before shaping, to pause before claiming, to leave space where the world can still answer back. The long patience of a world that refuses to harden. Then let us slow everything back down again, because magic itself would not hurry this part. In the wizarding world, patience is not experienced as delay, it is experienced as depth. Those who grow old within magic do not feel time pass as a sequence of events, but as a gradual thickening of understanding. Moments do not replace one another, they settle on top of each other layer by layer until choice itself becomes textured. This is why elders in the wizarding world rarely give direct answers, not because they wish to be obscure, but because they know that answers spoken too cleanly flatten experience. Instead, they tell stories that seem to wander. They pause mid-thought. They allow silence to stretch until the listener begins to hear what the words are circling rather than stating. This manner of speaking is not tradition, it is adaptation. Magic does not survive contact with haste. Over centuries, the wizarding world learned this not through philosophy, but through consequence. Every era that tried to accelerate mastery produced brilliance quickly and collapse shortly after. Every era that slowed learning appeared stagnant from the outside, yet endured. And endurance, for magic, is the highest form of success. So the modern hidden world cultivates what might be called long patience. Not the patience of waiting for something to happen, but the patience of allowing things to reveal their true weight before responding. This patience shapes everything. Magical research is conducted across generations, not lifetimes. Questions are inherited deliberately unfinished. Some theories are passed down with the explicit instruction not to resolve them yet, because magic itself changes depending on who asks. A spell refined too early may function perfectly for a world that no longer exists by the time it is needed. So the wizarding world learns to let questions age. This is deeply uncomfortable for those newly introduced to magic. They want results, they want clarity, they want confirmation that they are progressing. And they are told, gently but firmly, that progression is not measured by output. It is measured by how little correction is required afterward. A young practitioner may cast 10 flawless spells and still be considered unready. Another may cast only one, hesitantly, imperfectly, yet be trusted with more responsibility. The difference lies not in skill, but in aftermath. Magic always leaves traces, not visible residue, but directional influence. After some people act, the world feels tighter. After others, it feels more open. The wizarding world learned over time to value those who leave openness behind them. These are the ones who shape the future without naming it. They are rarely innovators in the dramatic sense. They do not invent entirely new branches of magic overnight. Instead, they refine conditions. They notice when a practice creates subtle strain and quietly remove one unnecessary step. They sense when a rule has begun to serve fear rather than balance and allow it to soften through disuse. This is not rebellion, it is maintenance of coherence. Magic, when treated this way, does not resist change, it participates in it. And so the future of the wizarding world does not arrive as rupture, it arrives as continuity that feels slightly different than before, lighter in one place, denser in another, adjusted just enough to remain alive. This is why prophecy never ruled magic for long. Prophecy attempts to collapse time, magic insists on unfolding. Those who tried to force futures found their visions bending, fragmenting, or dissolving into metaphor, not because magic was being evasive, but because it refuses to be pinned to a single outcome. The first magic ever cast contained this refusal already. It did not promise repetition, it did not guarantee reliability. It responded once, fully, and left the rest open. Everything since then has been an effort to live responsibly inside that openness. Now, in this quiet era, the wizarding world no longer tries to push magic forward. It walks beside it, sometimes slightly ahead, sometimes slightly behind, always adjusting pace so that neither is dragged. And this walking, this shared tempo, is what allows magic to remain awake without becoming strained. How a world that moves slowly learns to grieve. In a world that refuses to hurry, grief is never pushed aside. It is allowed to take its full shape. The wizarding world learned this the same way it learned everything else, not through doctrine, but through failure. In earlier ages, loss was often met with magic. A wound could be closed, a body restored, a voice summoned back briefly from the edges of absence. And for a time, this seemed merciful. But magic, as it always does, revealed the deeper cost. Those who returned did not return whole. Those who lingered were not truly present, and those who avoided grief found it resurfacing later, heavier, distorted, woven into places it did not belong. Magic can delay pain, it cannot resolve it. So the wizarding world learned, slowly, reluctantly, that grief must be walked through, not stepped over. This realization reshaped entire branches of practice. Healing magic became less about erasure and more about support. Spells strengthened the body's ability to endure rather than forcing it back to what it had been. Memory magic was refined with great care, not to remove pain, but to prevent it from hardening into fixation. The goal was never forgetting, it was integration. This is one of the most delicate systems in the hidden world. Magic may soften the sharpest edges of loss, but it must never deny the reality of absence. Because absence teaches orientation. When someone is gone, their absence reshapes how the world is navigated. Paths change, habits shift, rooms acquire new silence. Magic that tries to overwrite this creates dissonance. The wizarding world learned instead to let grief alter structure naturally. Communities slow down, lessons pause, rituals lengthen rather than intensify. No one is asked to move on. They are invited to move with what has changed. This is why mourning in the wizarding world often lasts much longer than outsiders would expect. Not because people are trapped in sorrow, but because they refuse to compress it. Grief, like magic, unfolds at its own pace. Elders speak of this quietly to the young. They explain that some losses will never become light. They will become familiar instead. And familiarity is not failure, it is adaptation. Magic responds well to this honesty. In places where grief is acknowledged openly, magic settles rather than recoils. Spells remain stable. Accidental magic decreases. The world, it seems, prefers truth held gently to denial masked by power. This is why resurrection myths remain myths. They are preserved not as instruction, but as warning. The first magic ever cast did not deny death. It responded to life as it was, uncertain, fragile, temporary. Everything that followed had to learn how to live within that truth. And so the wizarding world grieves slowly. It remembers deliberately. It allows loss to reshape its rhythms without trying to correct them. People speak the names of the departed without summoning them. They leave spaces unfilled. They allow silence to remain silence. Magic, witnessing this restraint, does not interfere. It recognizes the posture. It understands that some things must be carried, not altered. This too is part of the long patience that keeps magic coherent. Because a world that rushes grief will eventually rush everything else: power, knowledge, consequence. And magic cannot survive where nothing is allowed to finish unfolding. The weight of living memory. In a world that moves slowly, memory does not fade in straight lines, it settles. The wizarding world does not treat the past as something finished, nor as something to be revived. It treats it as something that shares space with the present. This is what distinguishes living memory from nostalgia. Nostalgia tries to return, living memory stays. Within magical communities, the past is not preserved through monuments alone. It is carried in habits, in phrases that survive long after their origins are forgotten. In pauses taken at certain thresholds without anyone fully remembering why. A doorframe where people hesitate for a breath. A path no one walks at night. A spell always taught with an extra warning, even when no one can name the event that inspired it. These are not superstitions, they are residual understandings. Magic responds to them. Places where memory is allowed to remain layered behave differently. They are more stable, less reactive. Magic flows through them without sudden distortion. This is because memory, when not forced into clarity, acts as a kind of buffer. It absorbs shock. In earlier ages, the wizarding world tried to archive everything: dates, names, outcomes, causes. They believed that perfect recall would prevent repetition of mistakes. Instead, it accelerated them. Clear records invited reenactment. Exact methods tempted imitation without context. So the hidden world learned to remember differently. Some histories are recorded precisely. Others are deliberately blurred. Contradictions are preserved rather than corrected. This frustrates those who seek certainty, but it protects those who seek orientation. Magic does not need to know exactly what happened. It needs to know how it felt when things went wrong. That feeling, the tension before collapse, the narrowing of options, the sense that consequence was being rushed, is what is carried forward. And so when similar conditions arise again, magic tightens slightly, not to prevent action, but to slow it. This is why certain mistakes rarely repeat in the same way, not because they are forbidden, but because the world itself resists being pushed down a familiar slope. Living memory teaches through resistance. Individuals absorb this as well. Elders do not recount their lives as sequences of achievements. They speak instead of moments when they should have acted and did not, or acted too quickly and learned restraint afterward. They emphasize aftermath. What changed after? How long did it take to settle? What did you have to carry that you did not expect? These are the questions that matter. Magic listens when these stories are told because they align with its own way of learning. Magic does not store information, it stores patterns of consequence. This is why some places feel heavy without being dangerous, why some spells feel uncomfortable even when technically sound, why some choices feel wrong before reason can articulate why. Living memory is at work, and the wizarding world honors it by not demanding resolution. Anniversaries are observed quietly. Rituals mark absence without attempting to fill it. Names are spoken without summoning echoes. This restraint keeps memory from calcifying. It remains flexible, able to inform without commanding. The first magic ever cast was born into a world that did not yet insist on explanation. That world is gone. But its posture survives in how memory is handled now, not as instruction, but as attunement. A shared sense of where the ground grows unstable, of where silence should be preserved, of where time must be allowed to stretch. This is how the wizarding world stays oriented without clinging to the past. It remembers without being pulled backward. And magic, recognizing this balance, continues to flow without resistance. The architecture of trust in a hidden world. Trust in the wizarding world is never assumed. It is constructed slowly, layer by layer, in ways so subtle that most who rely on it are barely aware it exists. This is unavoidable. A hidden world cannot depend on visibility, reputation, or spectacle. It cannot rely on public accountability or constant verification. So it learns something far more difficult: how to let trust emerge from consistency rather than proof. In the non-magical world, trust is often transactional. It is reinforced through contracts, documentation, enforcement. In the wizarding world, those mechanisms fail quickly. Magic does not behave well under surveillance, and secrecy cannot be maintained through constant suspicion. So trust had to become something else. It became predictability of restraint. A person was trusted not because they demonstrated power, but because they demonstrated the ability not to use it when use would have been impressive. This is why historically, the most trusted witches and wizards were rarely the most capable ones in public memory. They were the ones whose presence reduced tension in a room, whose arrival slowed conversations rather than accelerating them, whose advice tended toward delay instead of escalation. Over time, patterns formed. People learned who could be relied upon not to act too soon,
Who would keep silence without being told? Who would absorb responsibility without demanding recognition? This is the quiet architecture that holds the wizarding world together. It does not appear in laws, it does not sit in councils, it exists in expectation. When something goes wrong, certain names come to mind, not because those people have authority, but because they have history of alignment. This kind of trust cannot be faked. A single dramatic act can build reputation quickly, but reputation collapses just as quickly when pressure arrives. Trust, by contrast, requires endurance. It is built across many moments where nothing visible happens. A dangerous idea discussed, then gently set aside. A powerful technique acknowledged, then deliberately delayed. A conflict noticed early and softened before it can harden. These moments rarely feel important at the time, but they accumulate. Magic notices accumulation. It responds differently around those who have proven capable of restraint. Spells stabilize faster. Accidental effects decrease. Correction becomes unnecessary. This feedback loop strengthens trust further, not socially, but structurally. The wizarding world learned slowly that trust and magic reinforce each other in a way power never could. Where trust is present, magic does not need to protect itself as aggressively. Where trust is absent, magic becomes brittle and reactive. This is why secrecy alone was never enough. You can hide power, you cannot hide motive. Magic senses motive long before outcome, and so the hidden world invests deeply in shaping motive rather than enforcing behavior. Children are taught to notice how their actions affect others before they are taught advanced spell work. Students are asked to reflect on consequence long before they are tested on precision. Not as moral instruction, but as calibration. A person whose inner alignment is unstable will never be fully trusted with magic, no matter how skilled. Conversely, someone whose judgment is steady may be entrusted with responsibilities far beyond their apparent ability. This is not favoritism, it is risk assessment. Magic itself participates in this assessment. Those who violate trust consistently find their magic growing erratic, not weaker, but less cooperative. This is not punishment, it is mismatch. Magic resists being shaped by those who refuse to acknowledge the weight of shaping. Over centuries, this mutual reinforcement, trust shaping magic, magic shaping trust, has created a world that does not need constant oversight. The guardians still exist, but their presence is rarely required. Because the true guardianship has become distributed, it lives in thousands of quiet decisions, in habits passed down without fanfare, in the collective understanding that secrecy is not about hiding wrongdoing, but about preserving a fragile relationship between power and humility. The first magic ever cast did not require trust, but everything that followed did. And now, after ages of learning, the wizarding world stands not on spells, not on walls, not even on secrecy alone, but on the shared expectation that those who live with magic will meet it without trying to own it. Why endings are held open. In the wizarding world, endings are approached with caution, not avoided, but handled gently, as one might handle a vessel that is still warm from use. This caution does not come from fear of loss, it comes from experience. Again and again, the hidden world learned that finality hardens what should remain responsive. A door declared permanently closed begins to press on the walls around it. A chapter declared complete stops listening for what might still be unresolved. Magic reacts poorly to certainty of conclusion. It does not rebel, it stagnates. So the wizarding world developed a different relationship with endings. Deaths are acknowledged, but never framed as disappearance. Teachings conclude, but always with the understanding that they will be re-encountered differently later. Conflicts resolve, but their lessons are left deliberately unfinished.
This is why wizarding rituals of closure often feel incomplete to outsiders. A farewell without severance, a burial without erasure, a graduation without final authority. These are not failures of commitment, they are acts of structural humility. The world has learned that nothing important ends cleanly. Magic remembers this more clearly than people do. Whenever an attempt is made to seal something absolutely, a spell meant to last forever, a law designed never to be questioned, a barrier intended never to soften, magic begins to resist. Not immediately, not dramatically, but through slow accumulation of strain. What was meant to protect becomes brittle, what was meant to preserve begins to distort. So endings are left permeable. This does not mean everything is reversible. Loss remains loss. Choices remain consequential, but they are allowed to breathe. The wizarding world understands that the most dangerous phrase in magic is not forbidden, but finished, because something declared finished is no longer attended to, and magic requires attention as much as it requires restraint. This philosophy reshaped how history itself is told. There is no final chapter, no definitive account, no single version that claims authority forever. Instead, histories taper off, they slow, they dissolve into reflection rather than conclusion. Students notice this early on. They read accounts that end mid-thought. They study events whose consequences are described more fully than their resolutions. They are taught to ask not how did it end, but what did it change? This trains a particular sensitivity, an awareness that meaning continues even after action stops. Magic aligns easily with this view, because magic itself does not end actions, it ends conditions. A spell resolves when the condition it addressed no longer applies. A protection fades when danger passes. An intervention withdraws when balance returns. Magic does not seek permanence, it seeks appropriateness. This is why the wizarding world treats its own survival not as a goal to be secured forever, but as a relationship to be renewed continuously. Secrecy is maintained, but not worshipped. This recentering is quiet, almost invisible, a tradition subtly rephrased, a teaching extended by a year, a practice abandoned without announcement. No one declares reform, no one proclaims evolution, and yet everything changes. This is the kind of change that does not fracture continuity. It allows the past to remain usable without being obeyed blindly. The wizarding world learned this skill from magic itself, because magic never insists that things remain as they were. It only resists being forced to become something prematurely. This is why innovation in magic often appears backward at first glance. Older methods are revisited, simpler approaches are reclaimed, complexity is reduced rather than expanded, not because progress is feared, but because clarity requires space. A spell refined until it does less often does it better. A law softened until it breathes often protects more effectively. A boundary held lightly often endures longer than one reinforced with force. These truths are not taught as doctrine, they are lived, and through living them, the wizarding world has learned how to let stories remain open without becoming unfinished. Stories, like spells, need time to settle into meaning. They cannot be rushed to conclusion without flattening what they carry. So this narration, too, has arrived at its ground, not because there is nothing left to say, but because saying more would begin to repeat what can now be felt. The first magic ever cast did not ask to be remembered, it asked to be allowed. And allowance, given patiently, without claim, is still what sustains it. The wizarding world continues not as a secret waiting to be revealed, but as a posture waiting to be recognized, a way of meeting power without ownership, of holding knowledge without closure, of moving through time without insisting on destination.
This is where the story rests. Not finished, not suspended, but held, as magic itself prefers to be held, with care, with awareness, and with enough openness that response remains possible. The quiet continuance of what was never claimed. Then we remain, because some stories are not meant to be moved through, but stayed with. In the wizarding world, there is an understanding, rarely spoken, never written, that some truths weaken when repeated too often, not because they are fragile, but because repetition invites ownership, and magic has always resisted ownership. So instead of advancing, this story widens. It settles into the spaces where nothing dramatic happens, yet everything essential is maintained. Morning routines continue, books are opened and closed, lessons begin without urgency and end without applause. Magic threads through these moments not as event, but as temperature, a subtle sense of rightness that is only noticed when it is absent. Those who live within this rhythm rarely describe themselves as caretakers of magic. They would find the phrase excessive. They see themselves as people who have learned how not to interfere unnecessarily. This skill takes years. It requires witnessing how quickly good intentions can collapse into force, how easily clarity turns into rigidity, how temptation disguises itself as efficiency. Magic teaches these lessons patiently because it has time. Time in the wizarding world is not a resource to be managed, it is a medium to be respected. This is why urgency is treated with suspicion, why calls for immediate resolution are often deferred until they reveal their true weight. Magic responds well to this deferral. It expands options instead of narrowing them. It opens alternative paths that were invisible under pressure. And so the wizarding world learned that restraint is not absence of action, but preparation for better action. This preparation is rarely visible. It happens internally, in how someone chooses to listen rather than respond, in how a teacher reframes a question instead of answering it, in how a guardian waits until imbalance becomes unmistakable before intervening. These choices do not make headlines, they do not reshape history dramatically, but they prevent history from collapsing under its own momentum. This is the true function of the hidden world, not to preserve magic as artifact or spectacle, but to preserve conditions. Conditions where power does not rush ahead of understanding, where knowledge does not outpace responsibility, where curiosity is tempered by humility. Magic, left alone, will always respond to these conditions. It does not need to be summoned loudly. It does not need to be defended aggressively. It only needs room. And the wizarding world, after centuries of adjustment, has learned how to provide that room without withdrawing from life itself. People still love, still argue, still make mistakes. Magic does not erase humanity. It accompanies it. But it accompanies most closely those who accept that not every moment requires intervention.
This acceptance does not diminish agency, it refines it. Choice becomes quieter, but more accurate. Action becomes rarer, but more effective. And meaning deepens because it is not forced to arrive on schedule. This is why the wizarding world does not fear stagnation. Stagnation comes from rigidity, not from stillness. Stillness, when held attentively, is movement at a different scale. Magic understands scale. It operates comfortably across centuries within pauses, inside hesitation. The first magic ever cast did not announce itself because it did not need to. It responded because it was invited without being demanded. Everything that has followed has been an effort, sometimes clumsy, sometimes wise, to keep that invitation open. Not forever, not perfectly, but sufficiently. And so this story continues, not by adding more words, but by allowing what has been said to remain unclosed, like a door left ajar, like a breath not yet released, like a silence that does not end because it is still listening. The place that grows by staying still. So we stay, not because there is nowhere else to go, but because this place, the quiet center the story has found, is still unfolding inward. In the wizarding world, there are places like this, not marked on maps, not protected by wards alone. They are recognized by how people behave once they arrive. Voices lower without instruction, movements slow without command. Decisions feel less urgent, as if time itself has loosened its grip. These places are not powerful in the usual sense. No great enchantments radiate from them, no ancient artifacts demand reverence, and yet magic behaves better here. Spells cast within such spaces resolve cleanly. Arguments soften before reaching sharpness. Thoughts arrange themselves with unusual clarity. The wizarding world eventually understood that these places are not created by magic. They are created by accumulated restraint. Years of choosing not to escalate, generations of deciding to wait one breath longer, countless small moments where someone could have acted dramatically and chose not to. Magic notices this accumulation. It settles into it the way water settles into a well-worn basin. This is why the hidden world does not centralize itself around monuments of power. It centers itself around habitable quiet. Libraries where no one rushes to finish reading. Gardens where nothing is forced to grow faster than its season. Rooms where difficult conversations are allowed to take the time they require. These environments teach without instruction. Children raised within them learn something before they ever learn spell work, that the world does not need to be pushed in order to respond. This lesson is not comforting at first. It feels like loss of control. But as it settles, it becomes grounding, because it removes the pressure to constantly justify one's presence through action. Magic reinforces this lesson subtly. It becomes less reactive around those who do not demand reaction. It becomes more precise when it is not being rushed. This is why elders often appear unhurried, even when circumstances are complex. They have learned to distinguish between situations that require response and situations that require endurance. Endurance is a skill rarely celebrated. It leaves no visible trace. It produces no immediate outcome. Yet it is endurance that prevents small disturbances from becoming irreversible fractures. The wizarding world depends on this skill more than on any single spell, because endurance keeps space open, and space, once closed, is far harder to restore than any damaged structure. This is why the secrecy itself was never meant to be absolute concealment. It was meant to be room-making, room for magic to exist without being reduced to mechanism, room for people to live with power without being consumed by it, room for the world to change without forcing magic to either dominate or disappear. The line between worlds, that careful boundary, is not a wall. It is a buffer, a widening zone of patience that absorbs pressure from both sides. Magic rests there comfortably, not asleep, not withdrawn, attentive. And this attentiveness is why the wizarding world has not ossified despite its slowness. It changes, but sideways, gently, through reinterpretation rather than rupture. A tradition becomes metaphor, a rule becomes guidance, a lesson becomes question. Nothing is discarded violently, nothing is clung to desperately. Magic approves of this posture, because it mirrors magic's own way of remaining. Magic does not insist on relevance, it does not campaign for belief, it does not argue for its necessity. It simply continues where it is allowed to breathe. The first magic ever cast was not an event that demanded continuation. It was a moment that proved continuation was possible. Everything since then has been an exercise in not closing that possibility. And so we stay here, in this widened quiet, where story has become atmosphere and meaning has become texture.
Nothing presses forward. Nothing pulls back. The world is not finished. Magic is not complete. And that incompletion held without anxiety is the most accurate expression of the wizarding world as it exists now. When the story becomes a way of standing, at this depth, the story is no longer something being told, it has become a stance. In the wizarding world, there is a word that is rarely translated, not because it is secret, but because it is imprecise by nature. It describes the way one stands in relation to power, to time, to consequence. It does not mean patience exactly. It does not mean humility exactly. It means something closer to being correctly placed. Those who hold this stance do not feel suspended, they feel settled. They are not waiting for permission to act, nor for the world to change. They are present in a way that does not lean forward. Magic responds to this stance with ease. Around such people, things tend to resolve themselves without dramatic intervention. Conversations untangle, conflicts lose momentum, decisions arrive when they are ready instead of being dragged into existence. This is not charisma, it is alignment without display. The wizarding world learned over centuries that alignment like this cannot be mandated. It cannot be produced through training alone. It emerges when someone has lived long enough to stop confusing urgency with importance. This is why the most trusted figures often speak less as they age, not because they know less, but because they have learned that speech changes the shape of what follows. Magic listens more closely when fewer words are used. Silence in this world is not absence of knowledge, it is the absence of pressure. And pressure is the one thing magic consistently resists. This resistance shaped the wizarding world in ways that are invisible from the outside. There are no eras named after conquerors, no ages defined by domination. Periods are remembered instead by how gently they passed. The long calm, the years of settling, the quiet interval. These are not times when nothing happened. They are times when enough restraint existed for things to happen without damage. The first magic ever cast belonged to such a moment. It was not an interruption, it was a reply. That distinction has never been forgotten. Even now, when the world beyond grows louder, more insistent, more confident in its explanations, the wizarding world does not recoil, it simply does not match the volume. Magic does not compete for attention, it does not escalate to be heard, it allows the noise to pass until listening becomes possible again. This is not withdrawal, it is endurance through positioning. And positioning requires constant, subtle adjustment. A teaching that once worked is revised without ceremony. A boundary that has grown too rigid is softened quietly. A method that invites misuse is allowed to fade from practice without being forbidden. Nothing is destroyed, nothing is defended aggressively. This is how the wizarding world avoids becoming a relic. Relics demand preservation, living systems demand tuning. Magic has always been a living system. It does not want to be locked away, it does not want to be unleashed, it wants to be met correctly.
So the hidden world learns again and again how to meet it, not with mastery, not with surrender, with placement. Standing where consequence can unfold, where silence has room, where choice does not collapse into reaction. This stance does not make life easier, it makes it truer. Mistakes still happen, loss still occurs, uncertainty still persists, but none of these are rushed toward resolution. They are allowed to shape those who carry them. And magic, sensing that it is not being asked to erase reality, stays close. It cooperates, it responds, it rests. At this point, the story has no direction left to travel, because it has reached what it was always circling, a way of being that does not need conclusion, a posture that can hold power without needing to express it, a quiet agreement between world and response that neither will be forced. So we remain here, not advancing, not concluding, where the story is finally allowed to be quiet. Then we let it rest, not by closing it, not by sealing its meaning, but by setting it down the way one sets down something that has been carried carefully for a long time. The wizarding world does not mark its endings with final words or lasting silence. It marks them with ease. The ease of no longer needing to explain, the ease of no longer needing to defend, the ease of trusting that what matters has already been woven deeply enough to endure without supervision. This is that ease. The first magic ever cast was never meant to begin a history. It was meant to prove a possibility. That the world could respond when approached without force, that power could move without being owned, that meaning could arise without being trapped in certainty. Everything that followed, every spell, every school, every guardian, every boundary, was an attempt to remember that possibility in a world that kept forgetting how to leave space. And slowly, patiently, the wizarding world learned. It learned how to hide without disappearing, how to teach without rushing, how to act without escalating, how to wait without emptiness. It learned that magic does not need to be protected from the world as much as it needs to be protected from haste. So the story does not end with revelation, it ends with continuity. Somewhere a candle is lit without intention beyond warmth. Somewhere a decision is delayed until it can arrive whole. Somewhere a spell is never cast because the world has already begun to adjust on its own. Magic notices these moments. It always has. And in noticing them, it remains, not as spectacle, not as secret, but as relationship. A quiet agreement between presence and response, renewed each time someone chooses not to force an answer before it is ready. The wizarding world continues not toward a destination, but within this agreement. It does not wait for a future where magic will return to the open. It does not fear a future where magic fades. It trusts the only thing magic has ever truly required: room. Room to listen, room to respond, room to remain unfinished without being lost. And so the story rests exactly where it began, in a moment of unclaimed intent, where the world is still allowed to answer back. Nothing is closed, nothing is concluded. The magic is still there, quiet, attentive, and awake.